Jimmy, you're running YouTube?
I'm sorry?
Is it running?
No, I'm gonna do the recording now if you're okay with that.
Okay, yes.
Start it up and I'll let you know. Okay, we're recording.
Okay, welcome. Good evening. Welcome to the Township of Hillsborough Board of Adjustment meeting for Wednesday, March 17th, 2021, which will be conducted virtually. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America,
and to the
republic for which stands one nation,
under God,
God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
This meeting will be conducted virtually. All board members, consultants, and staff will be participating remotely. The public will be given an opportunity to participate remotely through the advertised Zoom link or optional phone numbers identified in the public meeting notice. The public should use the raise hand feature in Zoom or the *9 if participating by telephone to indicate that you would like to be recognized to speak. Application documents were made available for inspection at the township website at least 10 calendar days prior to the scheduled meeting date in accordance with the meeting notice. Applicants and their professionals will be presenting remotely and will identify themselves before testifying. This meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, which is notice of the 2021 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers, the township clerk, posted on the bulletin board at the township municipal complex, and posted on the township's website. Additional notice has been provided to communicate that this meeting is being conducted according to the governor's executive orders and pursuant to Public Law 2020 C.11, which allows for meetings to be conducted electronically and pursuant to local finance notices recently published in the state of New Jersey. Tina, would you call a roll of members and professionals?
Yes. Mr. Venture is absent. Mr. Stamler?
Here.
Mr. Sirachi, absent. Ms. Salili?
Here.
Mr. Valchek?
Here.
Mr. Walmacher?
Here.
Ms. Comfer?
Here.
Ms. Haynes?
Here.
Chairman Herbert?
Here.
Mr. Maskey?
Here.
Mr. Anderson?
I'm here.
Mr. Euro?
Here.
And Jim is here and I am here. We're good.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next thing that we have action on tonight is resolution, consideration of resolutions. We have one resolution, TV and Rochelle Volasov, PA 2006. Board discussion on that resolution.
Motion to approve. Motion to approve.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call, Tina, and the
Yes.
people that can vote on that are who?
Mr. Stamler, Mr. Valchek. Oh, Mr. Valchek,
Yes.
Mr. Walmacher,
Yes.
Ms. Comfer,
Yes.
Ms. Haynes,
Yes.
Mr. Herbert.
Yes. Okay, next is Board of Adjustment business, and one thing we need to discuss this evening is the next meeting, but I'd like to hold that off until the end of the application tonight to see where we are, so we know what we have to do. Next is business from the floor for matters not on the agenda. So if anybody in the public would like to speak to the board about something that's not on the agenda, this is the opportunity to do so, please.
Yep, it's John. It's John.
Yep.
Hey, David, are we on track for the end of this month for you to give us an update on our the board recommendations and all that have been baking out there for a while?
Sure. Yeah, I didn't think the board wanted to go over it now, but I can give you an update.
What's the update?
You want-
Are you on target for what do you have on target for the end of the month? I think you said you were gonna have some approved, right?
That was a target date. Well, not approved, no. I'm drafting ordinances now.
Okay, so we're expecting to hear from that on the first meeting in April, because,
Yeah, I'll give you an update, right?
Well, you're gonna give us an update in April, right?
Yes.
yeah, and that's what we expected.
Okay, well, share a little bit of how far are you? You know, it's almost 2 years now, you know, Dave, so I just want to know, are you close with any of them?
It's being drafted, yes.
Which ones are you not close with?
Well, I'm not sure we want to go through this discussion now or with the whole,
Well, it's non-board, no, it's a pretty easy question, right? There's six recommendations. Are there any that you're gonna come in at the end of the month and say, I don't have anything for you?
the ordinance amending the home occupations is being drafted now.
So what, okay, so what does that mean?
Some of the other recommendations were already taken care of through other. So they're not all, I know it's all six. Some of them were already taken care of. Some of them are moved. Right now, as I said, the home occupations is at the front of the list right now.
Well, that's always been on the front of the list. Now, where are you with, I mean, come April, are we going to approve that and it's gonna go for final approval? Where are we?
Well, it goes to the planning board, the township committee first.
Okay, so right after our April meeting, it's gonna go right to the planning board? The
I
planning
wouldn't say
and,
right after, but that's my expectation. I'll have a draft done by April 1st, yes.
well, that doesn't help me out. A draft, you know how many drafts, you know, we can come up with here?
You know, the expectation was that Dave would give his report on the next meeting, the first meeting in April, so can we?
Oh,
continue
yeah, I'm not
to-
denying that, but it doesn't mean we can't get a status of where we are.
Okay, well, we just.
Yes, well, there's a draft, you'll have a draft of the home occupations by the end of the month.
The other 5, you said a couple of them are taken care of and some
Yes.
of them aren't,
Right.
but you don't know which ones.
Not offhand, no, I wasn't prepared to report tonight.
There's only 6. All right, let's move on. I'm tired of this, really.
Okay, so next we have business from the floor. If Matt is not on the agenda, this is the public's opportunity to talk to us about anything that's not on the agenda. So Jim, would you open up the line for the public to see if there's anybody out there? Jim?
Yep, sure, yeah. And then if you know, anyone wants to speak, you can raise your hand.
I don't see anybody. Okay, let's move on. We have one public hearing tonight, one application. And the application is Harvesters Gospel Center, file BA 1922. Dave, would you introduce that for us again? Reintroduce it, please. Dave,
You're
you're
on mute.
Dave, you're on mute. Dave, you're on mute. Dave Maskey? What?
He's having a problem getting off mute, I think. Yeah, like Miss Haynes had.
Okay, let me read it.
There we
down.
go. Got it.
Okay,
Got
there
it
you
now?
go.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute. I was getting a hand instead of an arrow. All right. Sure, this is a continuation of the Harvesters Gospel Center application to construct a church on a property that now houses a single-family home. As I said, it's a continuation. Certain amount of testimony was provided in December. It's a conditional use D3 variance due to some of the revisions, which I expect will be presented tonight. Some of those variances and waivers have changed.
And at this point, Mark, back in December, that's 3 months ago, in the first hearing, you gave the public a little introduction to how the process works at the Board of Adjustment, and there's maybe new people on the line. And I see that's at least 20, almost 30 people out there. So maybe give them a feel what's going to happen tonight and when they have the opportunity to talk themselves.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to be brief because, of course, the board members and probably a lot of the public attended the first meeting, so I don't want to be too repetitious. As Mr. Maskey indicated, this is an application for a conditional use. Conditional use is a use that is permitted if it meets certain specific conditions, hence the name conditional use. In this case, churches, houses of worship generally, are permitted in the zone. I think it's important for everybody to recognize this. This is not as if they are trying to bring a use that is simply not permitted at all into this zone. But the use is permitted conditionally, and as I understand it, and based on the application itself, the conditions that are not met are lot width. I'm sure Mr. Grodnick will address the difference there, but it does not meet the lot width requirement for conditional use in this zone, and it doesn't meet the requirement for impervious coverage. That is the amount of land that's covered by things, buildings, parking lots, et cetera, that don't allow the water to percolate easily into the ground. There is also appears to be a need, and again, there may be some discussion about this, for a D1 variance, because there will be two buildings. The existing home, as I understand it, is proposed to be kept, although not used as a home, that would be used for other church purposes, and then a new building not presently on the site would be added, which would be the church itself. And then there are a series of waivers. Now, from a public standpoint, you may not see any major difference between a variance and a waiver, but there are technical differences, and in particular, the standard of proof, the level of convincing that the applicant has to do is certainly lower for waivers than it is for variances. At least among those are the parking space size, the parking aisle width, and the zone requires a 30-foot buffer. And the applicant on the east side is proposing a 13-foot, at least that's my understanding, at least it's substantially less than what's required. The buffer we need to distinguish from lot setback or side yard setback. There is a requirement for side yard setback that is, as I understand it, not an issue. The buffer requirement is in addition, and that would require a waiver. Now, procedure, again, for those who may not have participated before, may not be familiar with the procedure, the applicant goes first. The chairman and Mr. Maskey have indicated this is not the first hearing date. The applicant has already started, but we are still on the applicant's presentation. The applicant will present its application by presenting witnesses. Witnesses will testify under oath. After each witness has testified, the board and board's professionals will have an opportunity to ask questions, and then the public will have a chance to cross-examine each of these witnesses individually. It is important for the public to understand that the time for cross-examination of witnesses is limited to that, asking questions about the testimony that's been given by a witness and then seeking answers to those questions. I suspect that there are members of the public who would like to make comments, perhaps testify in this matter in favor or in opposition. That does not happen at the time of cross-examination of individual witnesses. So the applicant goes through its witnesses one at a time through the same procedure, testimony, questions by the board and board's professionals, examination of questions by the public. Then when the applicant has completed its application, then objectors will have their opportunity. We have a not typical situation here where at least some objectors are represented by Mr. Mensch, and the usual policy of the board is that objectors represented by an attorney will go first. The procedure is the same for them. They present their objections by witnesses. Witnesses testify, questions by board's professionals, and then examination by those who choose to, presumably the applicant or people who favor the application. Once all of the objectors' witnesses are presented, then those who are not represented and who may appear either in favor or in opposition will be given the opportunity to present their comments. Any member of the public who wants his or her comments to be considered by the board, those comments must be made under oath, the same as all witnesses. If you make a comment or something gets on the record that is not after you have been sworn as a witness, the board is not permitted to consider that as part of the testimony. So it is important that you acknowledge the procedure and stick with it. Because there is presumably a relatively formal set of objections, because there's an attorney, it's possible that the applicant will want to present additional witnesses or recall some witnesses after that. And then it's conceivable that the objectors may do the same. So there may be the same procedure, applicant then objectors. At some point when the application is complete, the applicant's finished, the objectors are finished, then the applicant will be given an opportunity to present its closing statement, applicant's opportunity to try to point the board in its direction. Certainly objectors will be given the same opportunity. And after that, the public portion of the meeting will be closed. Once the public portion is closed, there will be no more testimony, there will be no more comments, there will be no more participation by members of the public, and indeed no more participation by the attorneys representing the applicant and the objectors. At that point, it will be for the board to discuss or deliberate, to consider what it wants to do, to discuss what it wants to do. And assuming that the board is able to do that this evening, then the board will reach some decision. That decision will be by way of a motion if we get that far. Second, if it receives a second, and then a vote. That will be the decision, again, if the board is able to reach that point. At some time at a future meeting, a written resolution prepared by me will be presented to the board to memorialize or place into written form the decision of the board. The board, of course, will get an opportunity to assure itself that they're satisfied that I've phrased it in the way that they want. That all would be at a separate meeting in any event. Unless, Mr. Chairman, you think there's something else I need to touch on, I hope that will be of some assistance to the public.
That was great. It was great to meet, so I know what I have to do tonight. Yeah. No, actually, we should record that and play it every meeting. That was really good to demonstrate. Okay, so we're ready to move on to the application now. The applicant's attorney is Michael Grodnick, and the floor is yours.
Good evening, members of the board. As you may recall, my name is Michael Grodnick. I'm an attorney at Savo, Gillespie, Grodnick and Fisher in Somerville on behalf of the applicant Harvest Gospel Center, Inc., which operates a Christian church known and operating as Harvest International Center. We've filed for approvals necessary to construct a house of worship on a 5.1 acre property located at 490 Hillsborough Road. That's otherwise known as block 203.10, lot 30. We had a full night of hearing on December 2nd, 2020, in which Mr. Stiers, our civil engineer, had detailed the existing conditions and the proposed conditions, which included demolishing an existing outbuilding, garage, septic field, and pool area, and the proposition for the construction of a 5,800 square foot building on the site while maintaining the existing house as a meeting center and an office. The application is for 180 seat 180 seat church and related improvements, including stormwater management, parking, lighting, landscaping, and walkways. As Mr. Anderson had indicated, this is a church or a house of worship is a permitted use in an R zone. It's known as a conditional use, which is a D3. Churches are considered by the courts as inherently beneficial under the municipal land use law. And this application necessitates a D3 conditional use variance for just two conditions that we don't meet. The one is the existing lot width, which is an existing condition. 200 feet is required and 190 feet is existing and proposed. For impervious coverage, previously we had suggested and requested a 17.5% impervious surface. However, after the last meeting with various revisions and suggestions from the board, most notably including reducing the size of the parking spaces, we're now down to 15.87%, which again is less than 1% of the permitted 15% impervious coverage. The other noteworthy change from the December 2nd hearing is the elimination of all the D1 use variances. This application first proposed to keep the residence as a parsonage use, which created additional parking requirements in excess of what we had proposed, as well as D use variances for having that secondary principal use on the lot. Since we needed that, we eliminated those previous D1 use variances. So we're just down to the lot width and the impervious. Time permitted tonight, I intend to introduce 4 witnesses. I'll do my best to finish. Craig Stars, our civil engineer, will explain the changes to the site plan since our last hearing. If you recall, there's changes to the parking area. A secondary fire access was added at the request of the township, as well as how we reached the reduction in the impervious coverage. Our second witness is Gary Dean, our traffic engineer from Dolan and Dean, who's going to go over the traffic impacts for the anticipated services. We also have Justin Osceola and perhaps Christine Nazaro-Cafone. They're our professional planners. And we have some brief comment from Pastor Fred Sue, who is on behalf of the applicant available to answer any operational questions and to go over hours of operations, employees, etc. Unless there are any legal questions, I would ask that Mr. Stiers be re-sworn in and go over the changes to the site plan.
Mr. Ogrodnik, I may two things briefly. Unless I misunderstood you, although it's, I think, a relatively small point, I thought you said that the lot was 190 feet. The plans, as I understand them, indicate that it's actually closer to the requirement. It's at 195 feet.
That's correct.
My
My
understanding.
apologies. I misspoke.
Yeah, well, I may have misunderstood you, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear. The other thing is you indicated that there are no D1s. I still think that there appears to be an open question about second principal building, although I think you're correct that there just no longer appears to be a question of a second principal use. But I do think that the question of second principal building remains open.
And Mr. Anderson, I was about to jump in for the record, just reflect, good evening, my name is Matthew Mensch. I'm representing a group of objectors. I'm not going to give a belabored opening statement, but I did want to comment on the exact point that Mr. Anderson just mentioned, that at least for the record, we may have argument at the conclusion of the case or at some point later on the issue of whether a D1 variant still exists. I know Mr. Grodnik and I may disagree on that, but I just want to preserve that for the record at this time, that we believe that there is a D3 and a D1 variance that is required.
And my reliance is on the March 2nd, 2021 supplemental report from Mr. Maskey regarding the variances identified by the municipality, but I certainly respect and understand the nuances of those principal uses and principal buildings distinctions with respect to Mr. Mensch's argument. Mr. Stiers?
Yes.
Chair, go ahead.
We're ready? Okay. Mr. Stiers, can you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Mike, you're on mute.
Okay, Mr. Stiers, could you share your screen with the updated exhibits and go over the changes since the December 2nd hearing, please?
Mr. Ogrodnik, just for benefit anyone who didn't participate earlier, I think it would be good to indicate what expertise Mr. Stiers has, not suggesting he needs to be requalified, but just so the public knows he's testifying as an expert and in what areas.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Stiers is our professional civil engineer. Could you briefly describe the benefit of your education and your licenses?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Lehigh University. I am a professional engineer in the state of New Jersey and Pennsylvania and have been practicing applications like this throughout central New Jersey since 1989. Applications similar to this, industrial, residential, commercial. I've testified before this board as well as the planning board, as well as numerous boards throughout central New Jersey.
My understanding is Mr. Stiers is being offered as, or has been, and it was qualified previously as an engineer.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess we'll pick up from the previous application. As Mike said, there was extensive testimony put in regarding the layout, the proposal from the applicant. And from that December meeting, we took pretty much all of the comments from the board, the public, professionals to heart, and went back and took another hard look at the site, trying to condense the site, as well as getting what the applicant is hoping to get approved. So obviously the church itself, the size stayed the same. One of the things that we did do is move it slightly towards the existing dwelling in order to decrease the impervious coverage. One was to make the aisles 24 feet and the parking spaces 9 by 18. Another one of the comments from the professionals at the last hearing was that the parking lot had dead end aisles going towards the back, so cars weren't able to turn around. So what we did was a big benefit was to move a lot of the parking from the back and move it in front of the church itself. So that cut down the amount of parking in the rear of the site, and obviously between moving the church and pulling the parking lot towards Hillsborough Road, we were able to reduce the impervious coverage by almost 3,200 square feet, reducing the percent coverage from 17.35 to 15.87%. I think I covered the dead end. So now we do have a circular parking lot. Cars can come in, circulate through the back of the parking lot without backing up, turning around if there's not a parking spot. They can circulate through the parking lot and then out. Another concern from the fire department, fire official, was to have its secondary means of access or emergency access for a fire truck, which we have also provided on the eastern side of the site. So this will have pervious pavers and a grid system, so a fire truck can come off of Hillsborough Road into the site either through the main entrance or through the emergency access.
Rick, can I just stop you? Can you put the plan up?
Sorry.
Okay, so
Yes.
this way to, yeah.
It says the host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think I need something sent my way to share the screen.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna promote you to a co-host.
Not yet.
Okay, that should have gone through.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, what I have on the, can everybody see that screen?
And maybe you can go back to how you turned around the fire trucks there and everything.
Okay, so everybody can see the screen now.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, circling back. So the previous application, if you recall, similar driveway came in as I'm showing right here, came back in the area here and had a dead end in this location, and then you'd have to come through around this parking bay and another dead end in this location. So what we've done is you can now circulate coming into the site. Actually, the back portion is one way, so you would circulate counterclockwise and then be able to come out and exit the site. The main driveway is two-way. The area in the back is just one way. The other thing that we've done is the parking in this area right here. And that's what I said, we shifted it to in front of the church. So that allowed us to shift the parking down towards Hillsborough Road. So between those two items, as well as reducing the size of the parking spots from 10 by 20 to 9 by 18, all of those items allowed us to reduce the impervious coverage by almost 3,200 square feet. Next item is that the fire official wanted a secondary means of access in case something happened at the main driveway. So we provided a secondary emergency access coming on the easterly side of the property and back into the site. The plans do show the truck turning template as both the fire official and the town engineer requested. And we were able to circulate the truck through this point and out the emergency access if needed.
That would normally have a chain across, right? So couldn't.
I'm sorry?
That would normally have a chain across.
Yes. That was one of the additional comments. I mean, skipping to the review letters quickly, and we'll circulate back, is most of these items that were left are really addressing details as such as what you just said, putting a chain across, putting markings on either side of the access. So yes, and I will get to those as we get to the
I
letters.
just want the public to realize that's not a normal, that's not a normal driveway. It's only for this.
Right. So there will be a chain across both ends. I think there was also a concern from a board member about making sure that if there was parking on Hillsborough Road, that the driveway would not be blocked. So we do have that hatching at the end of the driveway. And we also have it on the parking lot side.
Hey,
So-
Craig, it's John Stamler.
Yes.
It seems like, you really did take care of everything we addressed at the first meeting. With the removing of the 89 trees, you're planting 128. Are you still planting 128?
We are now planting 140.
Fantastic, thank you.
So that, that was gonna be, you kind of hit my list a little quick, but that's all right. I'd like to make a point of it. So previously, we did have a hardship waiver for the tree replacement. We have removed that request because we are now only removing 132 trees and we are planting 140. So that was another benefit to moving this parking lot closer to Hillsborough Road. Is I believe off the top of my head, we saved another roughly 60 trees that are going to remain in place. So that reduced the amount removed, hence the amount being replaced. We did change the buffering on the east side. If you recall in the last application, it's similar that what we have shown on the west side. It was a mix of deciduous and evergreen plantings. Due to the emergency access, we had a little bit narrower buffer area. So what we did was we planted all evergreens along the property line. That being said, we also, one of the requests or part of the ordinance is to create or provide a conservation easement on either side of the property So we are doing the 30-foot on the west side. However, due to the emergency access, the east side will only be 13 feet. But as you can see, this buffering is pretty substantial, even though it's only 30 feet wide. And the other important aspect is that the back roughly 600 feet of the property will also be put into a conservation easement. So you'll have both.
Let me interrupt a minute. Are you also planning on the stipulation that it cannot be subdivided in the back along with the conservation easement?
I think they go hand in hand, but yes.
Okay, just want to clarify. One other question, on the west side, people may be stopping and letting people out of their cars when they come in before they park. Would there be cross hatching? Let's say if it's there where I guess there are two trees, would you mark a cross-hatched area all the way across so that cars could stop, drop off people before proceeding to park?
It is not cross-hatched now. I mean, if that was something that, the board would look to, I don't know if the true benefit of it. I mean, the cars are still going to stop and drop off. I don't know if the cross-hatching would really do.
Well, but if it might alert cars that are exiting not to go zipping along because, people might be dropping off children or something of that sort.
Right. I mean, the other thing we could potentially do is put up, on either side of the island here, put a sign that says drop off area, something to that.
Well, yellow paint maybe catches the eye more than a little sign.
Yep.
I don't know if, Chicky, I know what you're saying, but if you draw attention to it and you make it a drop-off point, I mean, all the churches I go to and all, they don't have that. And if you're going to call attention to it, I think you're going to get more people dropping people off.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
my opinion.
Yeah.
Craig,
Yeah, I mean,
this is, I'm sorry, John, go ahead. This is,
I was done, Phil. It's all yours.
okay. Just going back to the circular drive, I didn't jump in quick enough. I apologize. Is there going to be a entrance sign and an exit sign? So that when, we're coming in this way, it's a circular drive, we're going out that way, so people aren't confused?
The only thing, we have a do not enter sign right here. So if you were to come up, you would see the do not enter and not make that left-hand turn.
Okay,
So
but coming in off the main road?
You would just progress into the aisle and then circulate around.
Okay, so they see that. And going into the main road, are there going to be stop signs or anything from a safety perspective at all, or?
As you come around the parking area, there'll be a stop sign right here.
Okay,
So that would, kind of, the people coming in would have the right of way.
right,
So then you would stop and be able to turn right. And then obviously a stop sign at the end where you exit the site. Yes.
okay, thanks.
No
Thanks, Craig.
problem. Yep.
One other
Okay.
question question, although the issue of the width of the parking areas was brought up in December, there was no definite, it should be made, the slot should be made more narrow or what. I personally think that keeping them the 10-foot widths is very important. Having gone and measured the ShopRite parking lot and a number of others where they're either 10 feet or 9.5 at least, I think 9-foot parking slots are, given the size of many of the SUVs and things today, I think they have to stay at least 10 feet, keep the 10-foot widths. The 18 feet in length, I don't have a feeling about that, but certainly, and I know that adds impervious, but I think we've got to be realistic about the size of the cars and vehicles that people are using these days.
Well, I mean, even typically a car, whether, it's an SUV or not, it's still 6.5, 7 feet wide. So, and I understand, but most towns in this particular area through central New Jersey are 9x18s. So that's
Well,
the
our
reason.
ordinance says 10x20.
Yep. Yep.
Just out of
So-
curiosity, I did a couple of calculations. You may agree with this or not, that if 60 spots had to be wider, let's put it this way. Yeah, so if we had 60 spots and they each had to be a foot wide, it'd be 18 square feet of car. Times 60, it'd be 1,080 square feet additional impervious surface coverage, which would bring it up to about 16.4%. You know,
But they're anticipating maximum of 25 cars, right? So, I mean, is there a compromise of maybe the 9.5 by 18, Chicky? Would you be fine with 9.5 by 18?
Well, it'd be better than, yeah, the 18 is I don't believe is an issue. But you know, it depends on how others feel, but if ShopRite is 10 feet wide and everybody is, or almost everybody's familiar with that parking lot, I don't know that.
Well, you know, look, put it in perspective too. If an SUV, and Craig, you brought it up, if one of them's 7 feet wide and you're making a parking lot 9 feet wide, well, you're giving me a foot to get out. Now, I'm 210, I'm stocky, and I'm 64 years old, so I'm pretty sure I'm paying somebody. But from prior testimony, I think on Sunday, 9 to noon was the maximum amount of cars anticipated, which was 25. But if we went 9.5 by 18, what does that do to the plan here?
they had about 500 or 600 additional square feet of impervious surface.
Well, I can live with that. Chicky, can you live with that? And can
Well,
other
it's
board
up
members
to,
live
it's
with
up to, it's up to other board members.
that? Well, I'm asking you first and then going to the rest.
I prefer the 10.
I mean, I went back to the YouTube recording from the December meeting and saw how we got into this conversation. Basically, it was at the point where the loop in the back was necessary, especially for the fire trucks. And then we got into a discussion about 5 different times that evening about how to offset that additional impervious, and one of them was bringing it down to 9 foot. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I don't want to confuse the issue, but since the board is talking about parking and the question of possibly increasing what the applicant is now proposing, the space sizes, I think that there remains an open question about the number of parking spaces. As I understand it, the number of parking spaces is calculated solely on the seating capacity of the church building itself, which there is a calculation in the ordinance. But at least my understanding is that there's no calculation of additional parking for the second building.
and
Well, we anticipate that the greatest demand would be during the church service, and it most likely that second building would not be in use during the church service.
Hmm.
So the 60 parking spots would be during the service. And then, you know, with the second building, it's offices and prayer rooms, so that would be more during the weekly services participation, which would be much less than that full amount of the 60 spaces on Sundays.
Well,
One of the
unless that were a condition, unless that were posed as a condition, I don't see anything that would prevent the full occupancy of both buildings.
And just for the record, can we clarify that no one will be living on this site, whether in that existing house or anyplace else? Is that?
That's correct. Correct.
That's correct. Okay.
No, okay, so nobody's living in there. Are there, right now, I can't see, is there any dedicated parking spots for that second building, the existing building?
No.
Okay, so there's going to be no parking spots assigned to that particular building.
No.
Okay. Now,
Craig, this is Philomena again. Do you have disability parking available at all?
Yes. I'll zoom in a little bit for you.
yeah,
So we've put that right in front of the building here. So there's 3 parking spots, which is what's required for the 60 parking spots.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Phil, not that this matters with this applicant, but do you know what the width of those parking spaces are at Mary Mother of God by chance?
I do not. I do not.
They're 10 feet, okay?
Okay.
So John, just let you know, went out to about 5 different churches, and Mary Mother of God is 10 feet. The Coptic Church on 206 is 9 feet. And Immaculata down in Somerville is 9 feet. Okay, so,
Yeah, and Immaculata gets a lot of traffic. Yep.
yeah, so they're 9 feet. The Coptic Church, that's about 12, 14 years old on 206 is 9 feet. And Mary Mother of God is 10 feet.
And this is a 180 seat church, or whatever they're calling it, 180. So I would assume they're anticipating growth as they, some expansion is anticipated. If they're going to seat 180 people in the church and only 25 cars are going to be in the parking lot at a time, I just think that if it grows, and I hope it does for them if this goes through, but it seems like there would have to be a lot more parking.
Yeah, this is Michael Grodnick. I think that's the balance. And we did submit a certification to the pastor, which detailed some of the operations as they currently exist. It's a total of 4 part-time employees and 1 senior pastor and 1 associate pastor and 2 worship youth ministers. So that's the staff. And currently for the Sunday services, which are 9 to noon, there's approximately 70 people. And we've taken readings of approximately 25 parking spaces. Again, this is pre-COVID. So yes, the idea is to build in some room for growth, but the applicant is fine with any type of width of the space that may be required, whether that's going to necessitate a parking variance, which I think we can do, or whether we're going to slightly expand the impervious toward the south. That's a decision for the board, but the applicant will agree to either preferred course of action.
Hey, Mike, how many parking spaces on the plan right now?
60.
60, okay.
And that includes the handicap as well?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, this is Matthew Mensch. I just want to very quickly, I don't want to interrupt, but Mr. O'Gronick just put some facts on the record. I wasn't sure. I think at the last meeting, he was going to have somebody from the church testify earlier this evening. It almost sounded like he was going to forego that testimony. Not to make this overly legal argument, but Mr. O'Gronick just put factual testimony on the record. So I would ask that if he's going to, the board's going to rely upon that, then somebody from the applicant should testify regarding the use, the growth, the operations of the facility.
I was just referring to a certification that I had submitted and reciting paragraphs 2, 3, and 4 on the certification that we had previously submitted. But certainly, Pastor Stu will be available to testify as a witness whenever we get to him.
Great, thank you.
Well,
And I think to possibly, I don't know whether it helps or hinders or, goes into the discussions of the width of the parking spaces. So we're at 15.87% right now, which kind of led me to look into the surrounding neighborhood just to kind of get a gauge of what are the rest of the lots. Granted, they're smaller residential lots, but what's the, I guess, average impervious coverage in the neighborhood? So what I did was
I have to interrupt. What exists elsewhere, I do not think is properly part of the record. This is a request for variance. Every variance stands on its own. The fact that other people have variances presumably was based on unique characteristics of those parcels. So I caution the board that testimony about, well, everybody else has it, is not a justification for a variance.
I was just going to go into the fact that, what the average impervious coverage is in the neighborhood. So
no, we don't need that. But Craig,
We don't need that.
Don't you have a catch basin somewhere on this property?
the detention base is in the front as
Yep.
it was previously. One of the, I think, one of the board members had a concern about the depth of the basin before originally. The original basin was actually 6 foot deep from the front berm to the bottom of the basin. That basin is now only 2 feet deep. So the reduction in impervious coverage, as well as we have worked out the main issue with the DEP and the wetlands approval was really the interpretation of where the groundwater was when we were doing our groundwater testing. There was an anomaly in one of the tests, which was quite a bit higher than the rest of the tests. However, we did use that worst case scenario. So the bottom of the basin went from 111 to 115 elevation wise. So the top of the berm is 117, the bottom of the basin now is 115. So it's only 2 feet deep. Additionally, it's, I believe Mr. Euro wanted some more landscaping in the front. So going hand in hand with what's required for the bioretention basin, as well as that request for additional landscaping, we added approximately 8 trees in the basin to kind of supplement the landscaping in front of the building, as well as complying with the bioretention requirements.
Okay, and I see that you've moved the church 15 feet to the north, but you're still building it right over the wetland area. Is that correct?
Yes. So I think I've hit most of, I did mention that we're no longer asking for the hardship waiver. The signage details we've added to the plan in the front. If you look at Mr. Euro's review letter, I think we've, for the most part, other than some details, we've complied with virtually all of his requests or comments.
Mr. Stiers, if I could just jump in before we get further on the tree mitigation. I was just looking at the landscape plan again.
Yes.
So you're required to replace 132 trees, is that correct?
Yes.
And you're replacing 100, you're planting 132 at a minimum?
We are planting 140.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Just to kind of a gauge as far as moving the whole development towards Hillsborough Road. Originally, the previous plan was 620 approximately feet from the rear property line. We are now over 650. So moved it approximately 30 feet towards to the north. The number of lights in the parking lot went from 12 to 9, and they're more centrally located within the parking lot, except for the western edge. But again, they're only 15 foot high. They'll be turned off shortly after any services on Sunday or during the week, whenever they're open. So I think that, as you can see, and was mentioned before, that I think we've gotten, a lot of the concerns, if not all the concerns from the board, the professionals, as well as the neighbors. Another comment that I recall, the neighbor to the east here, the previous plan had emergency spillway discharging onto his property into the head wall that's going underneath Hillsborough Road. That has also been revised, so that will go discharge, if it ever does, right onto Hillsborough Road and then drain to the inlet. So that will not go onto his property anymore.
Hey, Craig, it's John Stamler. Is there any external speakers that are going to be, or any chimes that are going to go off on Sunday or during service time, or?
No, not that I know of, no. I mean, there's not even a steeple, so I don't believe they'll even have a bell or chimes, like you said.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Stiers, Bob Euro.
Yes.
You had referenced my March 12th, 2021 letter. It is true that you have addressed the majority of our comments. There are still, half a dozen or so technical comments that still need to be addressed. Will you comply with those items?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Any,
Right.
no other question, Bob? Bob, you're okay?
Mr. Chair, no other questions. Thank you.
Okay. And,
Right. And Craig, you're right. You're complying with the engineer's suggestions or bullet list and also the fire marshal recommendations. So that's good. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, we just as far as the clarification, the FDC is off the building, but you know, if the application is approved, obviously we'll sit down and you know, work out that specific location if it needs to change. So, I mean, if there's really any questions, any other questions, concerns?
I have just one question. At the last meeting, I pointed out that, you know, the numbers that you arrived on the impervious surface calculation.
Yes.
Okay, we're not on the first page of the site plan, just the percentages. And you know, I still think I'd like to see these numbers added to that table, so in the future, somebody comes along, they could see where these came from, because, you know, this may not be available and this will always be available, you know?
Yes. And just that was another concern that you brought up, because there was a, I guess, a discrepancy. And what we tried to do when we first completed the initial application was that we wanted to document all the proposed conditions. And if you look at the chart, it's kind of the other way around. You detail the existing conditions, and at the bottom, it's kind of like a summary.
Right.
So that we clarified that, we filled out the new application or the new form and submitted that, you know, properly, I guess you could say, in this rendition.
Yeah, that makes a lot more perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had no problem putting the chart on the cover sheet. That's okay.
Yeah, no, it's just like I say, so anybody ever came across this in the future, it's
Yep. Yep.
Any other questions from any of the board members for this witness?
Yes, I guess just a quick follow-up. What would be the increase in impervious if you did widen all the parking slots to 10 feet?
I gotta set my clock.
What?
I would estimate about 21, between 2150 and 2200 square feet.
Well, what's that in percentage impervious?
Probably another 1%. So you're talking about roughly 16.9.
Interesting, because I did my own calculation, I came up with half of that.
Well, even if it's 1%, I'm, you know, for what they did and chopped everything down, I mean, honestly, I could live with the 1%. Chicky, how do you feel about 10? You know, how do you feel, and how about the rest of the board members if they go 10 feet on those parking spaces?
And I think we need an accurate number on the percentage of impervious, you know, if and when the board votes to approve or not. So.
All right, we'll wait.
I have just a question real quick. I don't know if this was brought up already in the previous meeting, which I listened to, but this thought wasn't in my head at that point in time. Is there any talk about snow removal? Like, we got a nasty amount of snow this year. So will the plows push it to the back of the property as opposed to pushing it onto Hillsborough Road, which at this point I believe is just, you know, a single lane both ways, making it more narrow?
Well, to kind of answer two of your questions or concerns, I would say, I've plowed a lot of snow in my day. I would come in and push it all towards the back. As you can see back here, you know, once you push it back, once you avoid the dumpster, you can pile it in this area right here. You can go along the back here. You can come across and push it on, you know, into the grass here. Please, and also note that we are also widening Hillsborough Road. So in our frontage, it's actually technically 2 lanes wide. So, I mean, I highly doubt that they would put the snow in this location. But if they did, it would still be off that one lane.
Against the law to plow it onto Hillsborough Road anyway, so.
Right, right. It wouldn't make any sense. You'd push it in and just push it towards the back.
And where is the mailbox gonna be that the snowplow knocks over? I drove down.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple more questions for Mr. Stiers.
Go ahead.
I know Mr. Stiers touched on the Environmental Commission report back in December, but it was quite a while ago. This was the November 24th letter from Environmental. Mr. Stiers, could you just quickly review that? It was two major issues. One was an oil drum, oil tank that had to be removed. And they had noted a drum possibly located outside the garage on the site. What was being done about that? Could you just sort of give a quick run over of those 2 points?
I believe that yeah, again, I didn't do the phase one, but I believe that the tank was not, did not have any materials in it. If there's anything that needs to be done to make sure that there's, proper cleanup around the drum, the applicant will do it. But I think originally when we walked the site, it was out in the corner of the outside corner of the garage. And then it was brought inside of the garage. But if there's any additional sampling or anything, that can be done. I did speak to the company that did do the phase one. They did not appear to have any major concerns with anything on the site. And I think they kind of noted that in their report.
Okay, were you remove, if I remember, maybe I don't, were you removing the underground storage tank?
From what we can tell, if the tank is still there, it's in this location right here.
Right.
And as you can see with the driveway going by, I think the tank would have to come out no matter what. So
Okay.
obviously that would be done in accordance with DEP standards.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Dave, can you give me the date of that letter? There was background conversation when you said it,
Sure.
November.
November 24th, 2020.
Thank you.
Okay, are you gonna address the stormwater management report that came in the last couple of weeks? Frank?
I can if there's questions on it.
No, well, I don't have any questions.
I read it. It looks good to me.
One thing I noticed that you came in on the 23rd, and that was the same day that the township changed the ordinance, so you beat them by about 4 hours with this.
And just so you know, we have, like I said, there was an extensive back and forth with the DEP. We probably met with them. Oh, probably had 10 emails, but we had a couple of meetings with them and definitely got that all worked out. So the DEP and actually the reviewer for the DEP is the same reviewer for the Canal Commission.
Mhm.
So I had an email with him yesterday. He did not have any other any concerns or requests, and he has forwarded to his supervisor. So I guess that's DEP terms ready for approval. So
Basically, I looked at the top number in the 100-year storm. You have 8.5 inches of rain. Everything could take that.
Yep. Yes.
You made a comment a few minutes ago that if there was any runoff in the front, that it would go across Hillsborough Road, not into the neighbor's yard. But is there supposed to be runoff that goes across Hillsborough Road? at all?
Well, right now, let me zoom in a little bit.
I thought we looked at that the last meeting.
This is the emergency spillway. So this is only used if every orifice in the outlet structure is clogged. So then what would happen, it would spill over the top and then not across Hillsborough Road, but to the edge of it. So it'd get to the curb line that we have proposed, run down the curb line and to the existing inlet on the side of the road.
Okay, you said, okay, I thought you said something about flowing across Hillsborough
Nope.
Road.
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Okay. Thank you.
no problem.
Vicky, would this be a good time to put the parking space width to bed, or do we want to let it continue to be uncertain?
I think we could put, well, It'd be nice, but now Chicky says she wants an accurate count of the
Well,
percentage,
ask
so we'll have to wait for
Ask
that.
some other board members. I
Right,
don't-
no, okay, yeah, no, I'm just, or I guess, John, any other board members have, concerns about 9 feet or 10 feet?
This is Philomena. I don't have a concern.
Okay,
Frank, I don't
Chair
have a
Bob
concern.
Euro.
go ahead, Bob.
I believe Mr. Ogrodnik mentioned that he does have a traffic engineer who will be testifying.
Okay, good.
Maybe Mr. Dean could shed some light on the pros and cons of 9 feet versus 10 feet.
Okay, good. Let's hold it until he testifies then.
Well, you could have other board members, maybe we could just hear from them, Frank.
I just
I
asked.
don't have an issue with it.
Nobody else had an issue.
Yeah, I don't think,
The only issue I would have is when you open the doors in a 9-foot spot of, let's say, an SUV. I drive an Acadia. Opening both doors, I would almost feel impossible to do.
Yeah.
You have to pull closer to one side.
I mean, just my experience today, like I said, I was down in Somerville. I went to the ICS church. I parked outside the Warren garage. That was 9 feet. My dentist's office is right there. It is 9 feet. It was fine until I came back down. A plumber pulled in with one of those wide trucks.
Yeah.
I almost had to climb in the window. So, I guess that can happen.
The one
Yeah,
thing to keep in mind, somebody mentioned you only have 1 foot. You have 2 feet.
Yeah.
Because there's not a wall at the parking stripe. The other car is going to be 1 foot from the stripe, so you actually have 2 feet to open the door and be able to get out.
maybe
Oh.
the other car is in the middle of their slot.
Yeah, unless they do that, yes.
I mean, my example today, this guy pulls in this 8-foot wide plumbing truck, and when I was up in the dentist chair, so.
hey, Craig, while we move on and stuff, could you just calculate what it would be if the space was 10 feet and then?
Why, I just do a quick 2 feet times 60 spaces,
No, it's 1 foot because we're going from 9 feet
9
to
to
10
10.
feet.
All right.
Okay, so it's 1 foot times 18. It's 18 feet a car times 60. That's 1,080 square feet, which would bring it from 1,587 up to 1,630. It's about 0.5% more.
Yeah, but wouldn't that lengthen the aisleway also?
No, we're leaving it at the 18 feet is not an issue for any of us, I don't think.
Yeah,
I meant from north to south.
Oh yeah, no, he have to move everything out. You need a new site plan if we want with that for sure.
yeah, and that's what we're talking about. We're going to increase by like 0.5%, right, Craig?
Right.
Yes.
15
Yep.
line up to 16.4. So
Is the aisleway 24 feet wide across?
Yes. Yes.
Hey, Frank, just to let you know, I'll support the 10 feet and just adding the 0.5%.
yeah, okay. Thank you, John.
How about the other board members? What's their, Chicky?
Yeah, I obviously I'd be happy with the 10-foot width and keeping it at the 18-foot length.
Right, and you're okay with the additional 0.5% impervious, right?
25%.
0.5. Point.
0.5.
All right. I'm sorry, 0.5%.
Right, yes, yeah.
Anybody else have input on this? Board
I'm
members?
good. I'm good with that.
Okay. Hearing nothing else, so at this point, we'll open for public questions for this witness and.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I do have a couple of things
Oh, go
to
ahead.
explore with Mr. Stiers, if I may. These are somewhat broader questions, I think, than perhaps some of the other things that were discussed. Mr. Stiers, this is just an observation I've made on the overall site layout. It appears that at some point, someone thought that Linden Drive was going to go across the back of this property and the two adjacent properties. I assume you're aware of that.
Yes.
That in that area. I obviously have no idea why that was set out that way. And certainly I acknowledge that this lot does not have direct access to Linden Drive on either side. But has the applicant explored the possibility of obtaining an easement to send the at least secondary access across one or the other of the adjacent lots onto Linden Drive. The reason I ask that is, of course, it would alleviate some concerns on the buffer, which I'll get to in a moment. But are you aware whether any exploration of that has been done at all?
No, we didn't. Mainly to the fact that we were trying to preserve the back half of the property.
All right. I mean, I understand the answer. Focusing on the buffer for the moment, this is the buffer on, well, this is for everybody who's looking at the plan on the bottom side. It's easier for me to describe it that way, and I think everybody can see it that way. My understanding is that the ordinance requires a 30-foot buffer. Is that your understanding?
Yes. Yes.
And as I believe you indicated earlier, the applicant is proposing 13 feet, correct?
Yes.
Did you get my question? I'm sorry.
Yes, yes, that's correct. 13 feet.
Okay. Can you talk a bit about the physical characteristics of this? I mean, I guess the question that comes in my mind is, how can you provide something that's reasonably equivalent to a 30-foot buffer in 13 feet?
As you can see on the upper portion of the plan, that's the 30-foot buffer. And what we've shown is a mix of evergreens as well as deciduous plantings in that 30-foot buffer. Whereas in the 13-foot buffer, this is all deciduous, and you can see that the trees are much tighter. So that will be a much denser and year-round buffer.
You said deciduous. I think you mean evergreen.
Evergreen, I'm sorry. Yes, correct.
Okay. In your opinion, is what is proposed there on the bottom side, I believe it's the east side, do you think that that is functionally equivalent to the required 30-foot?
I believe it'll provide a substantial buffer, yes. That once it, even when it's planted, they're larger trees, I believe. So right off the bat, it's going to be a very dense buffer from the church to the adjoining property.
It would be 2 years at county college.
All right, thank you for answering the question.
2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hey, Craig, I know with white pines, they normally go 8 feet apart. And also you're putting one in the middle. So I agree with you. I think that buffer is pretty tight.
Yeah. I mean, it's a 10-foot spacing, but it's a stagger. So like I said, it'll tighten itself up, in very short time.
Yep, exactly. I just hope it gets maintained if any of them die.
Yep.
So any more questions from professionals or board members? In which case I'll open public and hand it off to Mr. Mensch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stiers, I have a bunch of questions for you. I may jump around a little bit. I apologize. And for purposes of the board, I'm not going to repeat all the questioning that we did at the last meeting with regard to drainage. I think we kind of covered that that meeting, and I'm going to focus more on the testimony that Mr. Stiers has offered tonight. I'll work backwards, Mr. Stiers, from what we were just talking about. If the access road, access drive, I should say, was not included in the plans, the applicant would be able to plant additional trees and buffering, correct?
Yes.
And it would make that, provided without the access road, there'd be opportunities to provide more trees and shrubs to block the view of the church, block any light spillage or any other activity on the site, correct?
Yes.
But we can't do that because there's an access road, correct?
Yes.
Back to work.
But we need the access road because without the access road, the fire department does not believe that it would be safe in case there's a fire and they need access to the church, correct?
Yes,
So with regard to that issue, the board will need to decide if they were inclined to approve the application, they would need to decide between providing additional buffering to the neighbors to the east of this facility or providing for the fire safety of the church, correct?
yes.
With regard to that access drive, is that paved? Is it the same material as the rest of the driveway, or is it something different?
No, it's a grid system, so it actually, grass could grow through it.
Okay, so when,
It can support a fire truck.
okay, so when somebody is looking at it, what's it gonna look like?
Grass.
Okay, so if somebody was driving down the street, they're not gonna see something that looks like a driveway or pavement, they'll just see a grass strip, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay. The grid system allows for water to drain through it?
Yes.
Okay, so that does not count into any pervious coverage calculations.
No.
You indicated that the basin is now 2 feet deep as opposed to 6 feet deep.
Correct.
Is the basin wider or longer, or what happened with regard to the capacity to hold water?
Well, one, we did reduce the coverage substantially. The other thing is that we put a wall around the existing house. So instead of a slope, we have a wall so that increase some of the space. And, you know, it's essentially similar in shape. It goes from this location down to the front, similar in shape than the last basin. So it's just how the water is handled and also the decrease in coverage.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple questions about what you just said, and bear with me. I don't mean to sound stupid, but in the last basin, it was 6 feet deep. This basin is 2 feet deep, which would make me think it can hold less water if the other dimensions of the basin have stayed the same, and we've just made it shallower. So did other dimensions of the basin change, or just the depth?
Well, the other thing is that in the last application, we had a drainage system along the back or along the west side, piping and then piped into the basin.
Right.
So that piping alone drove the basin down. The depth of it drove it down so that we could drain to it.
Okay.
Because we had to raise the bottom of the basin, we were able to eliminate a lot of that storm piping with the exception of the cross pipe in this location. So there's a high point in front of the church, which drains to the 2 basins in front. And then the rest is sheet flow that comes through the parking lot and then drains around the church and into the basin. So we were able to lift the basin as well because we were able to eliminate the piping.
Okay.
So it's not also a matter of the last basin was so big it had to handle all the water.
Hold on a minute, Mr. Stiers. Can everybody put themselves on mute, please? Mr. Stiers, can you please repeat that? It's also a matter of.
So it's a matter, the depth of the basin was also a function of being able to drain the parking lot being via an inlet and pipe system. So with the groundwater being higher than, and using a worst case scenario, the bottom of the basin had to be set at 115. So we had to eliminate the piping, and now we're using sheet flow to get to the basin itself, which allowed us to raise the basin up and still meet the requirements of the stormwater regulations.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my question a third time and then go back over some of what you just said. Does the current basin hold more, less, or equal water than the basin that was proposed the first time?
Less.
Okay. Do you know how much less?
No, I don't.
Okay. Now, you indicated in your answer to my question right now that part of the reason for the change in the basin was because you've changed the drainage system. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So can you then, you said that drainage from I'm pointing at my screen as if you can see it. I apologize. The drainage in the rear part of the parking lot, right there, where was it going before and where is it going now?
Before we had a high point and it drained to an inlet in this location, and the piping went along the curb line, tied into an inlet right here and then into the basin.
Okay.
Now the high point is along this curb line on the west side, and it drains across the parking lot, through the grass area, and into the basin.
Okay. So when you say now drains through the grass area down at the east side of towards the bottom of the parking lot there, is it draining through a pipe, a ditch, above ground, below ground? Where is that water flowing as it drains?
It's above ground, and it is a low area that ultimately gets to a swale in this location, which transports it to the basin itself.
Okay. What stops the water, as opposed to kind of making that turn, so to speak, and almost following along the path of the access road? How do we know the water is not going to go into the neighbor's yard and not make that turn in towards the drainage basin?
There's a high point pretty much all the way along the east side of the property. So this area is higher than this location.
Okay, so that water then will not go down into the neighbor's yard from that area?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned before in your answer that you mentioned some sort of wall. Can you talk to us about what that wall is?
We have a wall in this location right here, which is no more than 3 feet in height. So it's more of a landscape wall. But instead of the slope coming all the way out into this location here, we're able to utilize this entire area because of the wall and the elevation.
The wall will be like a brick, stone wall, wood. What will it look like to the public when they come on the property or view the property?
It would probably be a segmented block wall. And then we have landscaping out in front of that. So it'd actually be tough to see in the first place.
Okay. Mr. Stires, you had a picture up before with Mr. Anderson that showed an aerial view of the property, of the zone.
Yep.
Was that one was a little bit further out, or it was a different picture? There we go. Okay, so Mr. Stires, I may ask the planner the same questions, but on that image, are there any other properties that you're aware of in that image that has a drainage basin in the front yard?
No.
Any other properties that you're aware of that's shown as depicted there that has a parking lot or outdoor lighting?
Not in this area, no.
Yeah, okay. Any
Just
buildings?
below, just to the bottom here is the school. So another row of houses. And then you have the school with the parking lot and lighting, yes.
Right, understood. And in this, from what we see here, all those appear to be residential houses, correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Can you go back to the image that we've been working off of plans? Thank you. We've had a lot of conversation about the parking, the width of the parking spaces. I don't know, Mr. Stires, if you've actually calculated the increase. I think one of the board members had mentioned that it's not just the increase of the parking spaces, but you'd have to extend the driveway itself, because now it's a longer driveway because the spaces are longer. Do you have a number of what the impervious coverage would be if the board granted the application and expanded the parking spaces by the width?
I think we discussed it would be approximately 0.5%.
I just want to know if that was your number, sir, or that was a number that a board member had come up with back of the napkin calculation, which may be correct, but I just.
So the calculation would be 1 foot times 18 times 60. 1,080.
Okay, and just so I understand, when you said 1 foot, that's because each space gets 1 foot wider.
Yep.
By 18, because that's the depth of the parking stalls. Okay. And then you said by 60, because that's how many parking spaces there are, correct?
Yeah, actually it would be 57 because the ADA spaces would remain the same.
Okay. So when I'm looking at the parking lot, that calculation that you've just made is for the actual width of the parking spaces. So just focusing right now on the parking spaces at the top of the west side, I guess, of the property.
Mhm.
So if you were to calculate those out, the new number, whatever that would be for those spaces, would show increasing those spots. However, wouldn't you also need to expand the driveway now at I'll call it the left side of the parking lot, because the spaces are wider, which means the driveway has to be longer. And the calculation you just did not include the additional space of the driveway that's required to get you to those parking spaces.
Correct.
Okay. So whatever the number is, it's larger than 1 foot by 18 by 60.
That's correct.
Okay. We don't know what that number is off the top of your head because you'd have to redesign the driveway and do those calculations, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the board spent a lot of time talking about the width of the parking spaces, but the application also seeks a waiver for the depth of the parking spaces, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the standard is set by the ordinance that the Township Council voted on?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Sure. The size of the parking lot, both the width, I'm sorry, of the parking spaces, both the width and the depth of the parking spaces is set by township ordinance, correct?
Yes.
So at whatever time that ordinance was put into place, the governing body used their judgment to decide what size the parking spaces should be, correct?
Yes.
Similarly, the governing body elected by the residents of Hillsborough decided what the impervious coverage of this lot should be, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and it's set by township ordinance.
Yes.
And right now, the township, the percentage without any changes is, you said 15.89%, is that correct?
15.87.
87%, okay, which is obvious question, I know, but that is over what is permitted by the governing body.
Yes.
Okay. And obviously, another obvious question, but if we were to increase the size of the parking stalls, then to conform with the ordinance or partially conform with the ordinance, it would exacerbate the D variance impervious coverage, correct?
Yes.
I won't go through the same set of questions, sir, but there's also a waiver for the width of the driveway, which is another design standard set by the governing body, correct?
Correct.
And this application does not conform.
Correct.
Mr. Stars, do you have the report of, this is dated March 12th. This is the TNM report, March 12th, in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to ask a few questions off of this, just to make sure that I'm clear. I think there's gonna be some testimony later, but there were some comments about parking and the number of cars actually on site. The site has spaces for 60 cars and up to 180 people on the site, correct?
Yes.
So obviously that would indicate that that could be the capacity of an event on the church location.
Correct.
Okay. Do you see page 3, sir, of item of the report? I guess it's under subsection B. I'm looking at number 7 right now.
Okay.
You see that? I just want to make sure it's clear on the record that that report does indicate the possibility of a need for a variance because of 2 uses on the 2 buildings on the property, correct?
Based on the comment, yes.
Yep. Bear with me 1 second. Am I correct that all the other comments that have been put into this March 12th report, to the extent that there's requests being made by the professionals, the applicant plans on meeting, or at least from an engineering standpoint?
Yes.
Sir, do you know if there's, I guess really a question for Mr. Rodnick, but whether there's going to be testimony over the design architecture of the building? Do you know?
We have an architect that's with us tonight.
Okay. All right. I don't want to, I wanted some questions regarding kind of what the building looks like on the east side, facing the residents. But if you have somebody's going to testify to that, I'll save those questions for them. Mr. Stars, I think that might be all my questions. Just the board gives me 1 second just to make sure that I'm not missing anything that.
If I may, while Mr. Mensch is looking, Mr. Stiers, I may have misunderstood something, but I thought you said that the wall, this is the wall that would be adjacent to the basin in front, would not exceed 3 feet? Or did I misunderstand you?
That's correct.
I'm looking at a horizontal layout plan. Perhaps this is something out of date, although it's in with my material is the latest. It says install landscape wall 48 inches max. And has that been changed?
No, that's a typical note we put on there because, and Mr. Euro kind of alludes to it in his review. Anything over 48 inches needs a structural design.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a note on there just to kind of reinforce that we're 48 inches or less. So it's anticipated we don't need a structural design for that particular wall.
Well, I understand that. So, but you're saying notwithstanding the comment which is directed to structural design, the wall will not exceed 36 inches or 3 feet. Am I correct?
Right. And if you look on the grading plan, there are spot elevations along the wall for both top and bottom. And you can see that they don't exceed 30 or 3 feet or 36 inches.
I'm not doubting you're correct about your plans. Just want to make sure we have a clear statement from you on the record that it's not 48 inches max, it's 36 inches max.
Correct.
Thank you.
Last question for you, Mr. Tires. If you could zoom out so we could see where the trash receptacle is going to be maintained. Do you know the size or type of receptacle that would go back there? Are we talking regular garbage cans or are we talking like a dumpster that a truck picks up and flips over?
It has a size that you could put a dumpster in it, but our client has said that they have minimal trash. So it's there more of a just in case than anything else. So, I mean, it could store garbage cans but it is sized to put a dumpster in there.
Okay. If it was a dumpster and you had to get a garbage truck in there, would the garbage truck, I guess, drive straight in, flip over, empty the dumpster and then, I guess, back up and then make the turn around?
Yes. So they could come straight in because most garbage trucks these days for this type of pickup would pick up front loaded, pick up, back up.
Right.
circulate through the parking lot and back out.
Do you have any idea what either time of day facility like this would have their garbage picked up?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, I assume that the truck would have to back up. I assume would have a backup beeper on it of some sort.
Most likely, yes.
Okay. All right, great. I have no further questions, Mr. Cyrus. Thank you.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman, can I just jump in for a minute for a clarification? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, somehow I got muted. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
There we go. All right, Mr. Stiers, just wanted to backtrack a little bit on the buffer, just so everybody's clear. There's really two levels to that waiver. One, of course, as we've discussed, is the dimensional requirement of 30 feet. The other is the design specifications in section 188-38, subsections B, C, and D. You know, you would need an additional waiver for the design specifications if you can't demonstrate that you meet those minimum requirements. Is that understood?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so at this point, I'll ask Jim to open up the lines for the public not represented by Mr. Mensch for questions for his witness. I see we have at least one out there. Patty? Jim? Jim, can you open up the line, please? We got 3 people now. Did we lose Jim?
I can't see all the people. Let me see.
Okay, Mrs. Craig, can you pull down your display so we get back to, most people go back to the full screen, you know, to the.
Yeah, Craig, stop screen sharing so maybe we could see.
There we
All
go.
right, did we lose him? No, he's still here.
Muted. Jim, you're muted.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay, so could you open up the public line now for questions for this witness from people not represented by Mr. Mensch? I see
Sure.
3 people have their hands up out there.
Okay, we have 3. Let me find them.
Yep.
Okay, and if this is for Patty, if you can please state your name and address and spell out your last name.
Looks like Patty's muted right now.
Hello, Patty, can you hear us?
There she goes.
Okay.
I can hear you. I didn't think I had my hand raised, so I am represented by attorney. My concern, though, is that
Whoa. If you're represented by Mr. Mensch, you're not allowed to ask questions. Mr. Mensch is representing. Okay. Okay, you are represented by Mr. Mensch. You said that, right?
Yep.
Okay. And we'll move on to the next. I see David Warner.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Dave Warner, 54 Beverly Drive. Just have a few questions, and one started off by talking about a term called a conservation easement, and I'm pretty sure I have a good idea of what that means or what that is, but I'm just wondering if Mr. Sauer can explain that in that back part of the property, what exactly that means.
Basically, what it is out there right now will remain as it is. So it'd be a conservation easement. So they cannot remove any of the trees in that back 650 feet.
Okay, would that include, and I know the gentleman before, I don't know his name, it's listed as Wilson Anderson Peach, assume that's his name. He had shown a view of the street Linden sort of ending in the back there, and then discuss some possibility of extending that to the back part of the property. Would that conservation easement preclude any sort of extension of that property, even if it was by the municipality?
At least through our property. I can't say anything to the property to the east or west of us.
Okay, so on the proposed property though, there couldn't be a road that connected it on your,
Correct.
on the, okay.
Yep, that's correct.
I have a question about the buffer more towards the west side. I'm on the Beverly Drive. It is 30 feet there. However, I just have a question of the trees that are intended to be planted there. How tall do they get? In other words, I'm just wondering if I'm going to be able to go in my backyard, and I don't know how tall the building is or the church is proposed to be. Will the trees be taller than the building?
Once they're at full growth, yes.
Okay.
And there's a mix of, like I said, deciduous and evergreen. So obviously the evergreens will probably be a little bit smaller, but the deciduous will be, much larger in height.
Okay, gotcha. And my last question just has to do with the parking and more. I addressed it in the previous meeting, more in the front and in terms of overflow parking. The area where the fire access is going to be blocked off now. Do you know how many cars would be able to fit if they had to park on Hillsborough Road in that area there?
I would estimate no more than 3. A typical parking space, parallel parking space, is about 24 feet. So 3 would be pushing it.
And if by chance the overflow, the church grew and where they had a big event, where would be the only other parking place or parking spots that someone could park? On the adjacent roads? I would assume on Beverly or Ardsley. Is that a possibility? Or would that be your best guess?
I mean, yeah, worst case scenario, I would say, I doubt if they would park on Hillsborough Road, just because the 2 adjacent properties are, they're at that 1 lane width. So I would say you would probably park to the west.
I guess my concern is people, less the parking, people walking on Hillsborough. There's no sidewalk there. So on the edge of my property, the sidewalk ends, and then there's the property behind mine. There's no sidewalk there, and there's no sidewalk in front of your proposed location.
Well, there will be
Sorry?
sidewalk
There will be a sidewalk where?
Along the frontage of our property.
Okay, but not on the one, I'm sorry, I don't know the number. We're directly behind my house. There will be no sidewalk there.
There would be the one property to the west would be the only property without sidewalk. As soon as you get west of that next property, there is sidewalk again that takes you to, I believe that's Beverly to the west. So there is sidewalk on the side of Hillsborough Road. It's just west of the westerly property next to us.
West of the westerly property.
Best I can describe it.
I guess, well, would someone be able to park on Beverly and I guess walk on a sidewalk all the way to your property? I guess that would answer it.
The only part they would not be on the sidewalk is the adjacent property to the west of us.
The adjacent. Okay. Okay, and I guess when the traffic guy testifies, that maybe that's something I'll explore a little more. I just think that's a danger. I mean, I've seen people walking their dogs there. I've seen them hustling down the road, up and down.
Mr. Warner, I caution you what I mentioned before. If you want the board to consider this as the truth, you're going to need to testify to that under oath when the appropriate time comes.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. That's all the questions that I have.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I want to provide some degree of legal clarification in answer to what Mr. Warner asked earlier. First of all, just to avoid any confusion, Wilson Anderson Peach is the name of my firm. I am Mark Anderson, the board attorney. The firm name is displayed on Zoom. But Mr. Warner, you asked a question which I think spoke perhaps as one about whether the applicant could put a road back in the conservation easement or whether the town could.
Right.
The answer to that is different. Mr. Starr's answer as to the applicant is certainly correct. The applicant would not be permitted to do that in a conservation easement. Not that I think that there appears to be any possibility of it, but the town can always do that.
Okay, no, thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have Lisa Elwood.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm at 35 Beverly Drive. And a concern of the residents is water on Hillsborough Road that freezes and causes potholes and deterioration.
Let me stop you right there. Let me ask you a question. You were represented by Mr. Munch?
No,
Okay, now are you asking questions of the witness or are you making a statement at this point?
I'm asking a question of the witness
Okay, go ahead.
because at the last meeting, he spoke extensively about how the water would flow off the property. He explained the underground piping leading water from the back of the property to the front of the property. During his testimony tonight, he said that that underground piping would no longer exist, that a sheeting system of water would flow across the parking lot. I'm not clear on how that would work if the fire lane is somewhat elevated to support a fire truck and water is flowing from west to east. Is the water going to flow over the fire lane to the retention basin?
Yes.
Could you explain to me a little bit more how that would happen?
If you want to put the picture back up.
So much like it did in the previous set of plans, the previous set of plans, it drained from this location across to an inlet. Now we've flipped it around, so it drains from the curb line on the west side across the parking lot. There is a depressed curb in this location, so it can just flow into the grassed area. And then it flows through this low point, and there's also a low point in the fire lane, so that it can flow over the fire lane and into the grass swale. Keep in mind, the fire lane is also grass. It just has a grid system that can support a fire truck. So this is all grass, and it'll drain through the grass and into the basin.
And what would keep all the water from freezing in the parking lot?
The drainage areas are relatively small. So it's, this area here is coming to the back, and then the rest of it is going to the front into the two inlets in this location. So there really isn't much of a change from the previous design, other than the fact that we made a low point in this location in the last plan and then piped it forward. So what we were trying to do is keep the elevations lower, but due to we had to raise the bottom of the basin here. So we raised the basin and we were still trying to keep the site low. So we eliminated the inlets.
Well, it just seems to me that there's a big difference between flowing water through pipes under the ground and over the top of the surface of the parking lot.
But they're the same drainage areas that were there before. It's just a matter, we were able to get this area to flow overland and be able to connect to the basin. In the previous plan, this was a low point, so it could not flow from back to front without piping it.
Well, I'm definitely not an engineer, but
Well, maybe
what you're saying, it just doesn't seem to me like it makes a lot of sense. But like I said, I'm not an engineer. I will let that take your answer.
Let me follow up on your question for Craig. In other words, if it rained and the temperature dropped very, very quickly, is it possible that water could still be on the parking lot that could freeze in place? I mean, how fast does the water get off the lot?
I can't say that with any, give you a particular answer. I mean, there's also evaporation. It also, there's a certain amount that drains actually through the pavement. All depends on how much rain actually comes down. There's a lot of variables that go into that, answering that question.
Also, Frank, how cold, the wind chill, all that. That's
Right.
a loaded question, yeah.
Right.
And keep in mind that with the new stormwater rules that you mentioned that you now have to comply with, they encourage overland flow. You know, they don't want to see pipe flow anymore. They want it to run off the pavement, through the grass, into the basin. So this is more in line with what you're going to see now.
Yes. So in other words, you're saying you have enough grade there that the water will get off before
Yeah.
everything will freeze to take place.
Correct.
Okay, I did have just one more question about the fire lane. So will that be plowed when it snows?
It does need to be maintained. So I would say conceivably, yes.
So the applicant would be required to plow that when it snows?
Or at least keep it cleared, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You could take that down so I can see if we have anybody else.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I see a phone number ending in 1945.
There. Okay, Mr. 1945, go ahead.
I have an unmute message. I'm not sure if, is that me that you're getting now?
Yep.
Okay. I'm sorry it's not coming from that number, but as long as it's working, that's fine with me. My name is Craig Berlin. I live at 1 Allshouse Street in Hillsborough. And,
Sorry, what's the address? Correct. What's the address?
1 Allshouse Street, ALLSHOUSE. Got that?
Yep, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with the lengths that you people go to on these projects and stuff. I have to say that. I've been watching since the beginning, really out of interest. I guess my question on the parking lot is a little different than anybody else's. I mean, we're all familiar with what churches do and the events they have and everything. Is there any ordinance about outdoor activities? Would that cut into the amount of parking spaces available, say flea markets or things like that? And also, has there been anybody looked into the possible sound barriers for anything that's happening externally, be it an event or microphone sound, amplified sound, I should say? I'm just curious how that would affect the neighbors.
I don't know, if, Craig, is this something you can answer or we need additional testimony?
I mean, I can say that there was testimony provided at the last meeting that everything, all the events would be handled inside.
And who provided that testimony?
That was last meeting, Frank.
Right.
Okay, one other question, and that question was, I wasn't sure about, was I think that there was a comment about the garbage that's being done. I'm wondering what the capacity of the building is. And I think the comment was that there's not going to be a lot of garbage. I was just wondering what the capacity of the building is and what would qualify that, well, confirm that there'll be little garbage. I don't know how many people the building holds. I guess that's the first part of the question, but if it's 100, 150 people, obviously there's going to be a considerable amount of garbage if there's an event there.
Well, the church is designed for 180 seats.
Okay, and you would consider that, you know, the garbage is going to have to come on a fairly regular basis to pick that up. So I know that they were talking about the trucks backing up and things like that. I mean, I'm just wondering, I think this is taking the place of an existing house. I would imagine the difference in the amount of pickups and that were required during the week and things like that would be greatly amplified. And I just wanted to put that on the record that, you know, it might be something that needs to be looked into.
Frank, we might have to hear from the pastor.
Yeah, I don't know, Mr. Braddock, who would address, which of your witnesses would address that?
Gary Dean can address refuse pickup circulation. He's, our expert who can speak to that, and we can supplement that with the pastor. Again, if you have a smaller size dumpster with a church use that really only has Sunday services and some very minor meetings during the week, we don't expect this use to be a large garbage generator.
Okay, so we can wait for Mr. Dean to testify.
Yeah, I think he would have the best expertise on refuse.
Okay, I don't see anybody. Oh, one more hand, John Hemmings.
Yeah, one more. So let's see.
And Jim, I guess you can drop the public off after they finish, right?
Yes. Okay, so this is John Hemmings. So can you please state your name and address for the record?
There he is. Mr. Hemmings, can you unmute? Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, John Hemmings, 490 Hillsborough Road. With reference to the garbage dumpsters, 500 Hillsborough Road to the east of 490 is a 3-family with two garbage dumpsters there that get picked up weekly. If the church uses the same garbage disposal company, it would be getting picked up at the same time.
And you know this because you live in the house, the current house, right?
And you know this because what?
Okay, he's got questions. Witness.
490 Hillsborough Road.
You can't both speak at the same time. So, Mr. Chairman, what did you ask?
Okay, he lives in the house that we're talking about currently, and he's making a statement. Okay, so he's not asking the question actually.
Yeah, if you'd like me to swear in, I'll be happy to.
Which is
Not at this time.
not this time.
Okay, but I just wanted to point out that there are 2 garbage dumpsters already on the.
If you're asking the board to consider something as fact, you have to do it at the right time and you have to be sworn.
Okay.
Okay, look forward.
I'm willing to if you want to at a time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Well, that's good to know. Thank you.
And Patty has a hand back up.
Okay.
Yes, that's wrong. I own 500 Hillsborough Road, and there's not dumpsters.
We can't debate the facts now. If people want to make statements as to what's true and not what's not, they need to be sworn, and this is not the time to do it.
And we have Shirley.
Okay, Mr. Chairman. Actually, not. It's not letting me allow Shirley to talk. So let me just.
Is it possible because the other people are still on there? We still have Lisa and John and David.
Allow to talk is not available because Shirley is using an older version of Zoom. Choose promote to panelist to allow Shirley to talk. So are you okay with that, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, Shirley, can you hear us?
She will need to unmute.
Yep. Shirley, please unmute.
I'm sure I've lost. I don't see.
I don't
her.
even see her.
Yeah, I don't see her either.
I see her down
The middle.
I see her. She's on video. But Shirley, you're on mute. Can you unmute?
Shirley, you are on mute. Can you hear us? You need to unmute.
Bottom left-hand corner. There you go, Shirley.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Shirley Marlatt. I live at 480 Hillsborough Road, which is to the west of the property. And nobody mentioned anything when you were talking about the landscaping, about the western border. The eastern border.
You have questions of Mr. Stires about?
Yeah, I want to know about the 30-foot, whatever it's going to be, and I want to know about runoff.
Is she-
Oh, Shirley,
when that-
can't hear.
Shirley, we're not hearing you for some reason.
So I want to know what they do about that. And also,
I don't know what we do in this case because
she's
gotta-
if
Shirley.
they can put a barrier along that property.
Mr. Chairman, you do know I'm not getting that, right?
right.
Yeah.
Okay, we're having a technical problem with Shirley. She's, it's not, audio's not coming through.
Yeah, I don't think I have much control of that. It might be on her end or a network issue.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I wanted to know about that 30 feet is going to be beyond the parking spaces, right? The 30-foot barrier.
If you can see this plan, the 30 feet is this location right here. So there will be tree plantings in the 30-foot conservation easement.
Okay, well, the parking spaces are what, 100 feet long? I mean, for all those on that side.
Well, a single
And
parking space is 9 by 18.
That'll be paved, right? So when it rains, the water's going to go someplace. And I want to know how you're going to keep it going on this side of the property line and not over there, because right now with the snow melting, there's puddles there already.
Well, the parking lot will be all collected and directed into a detention basin in the front of the property. Pretty much the area
Well, how can you make the water run uphill if my property is lower than this property?
it's not running uphill. So it'll run downhill into an inlet and then into the detention basin in the front, which is basically, lack of a better term, a hole in the ground to hold the water.
And it won't go on my property?
Nope.
I don't know. And those trees are not big enough to be a barrier. And also, if the parking lot has poles that are 15 feet high with lights on them, you can't block that with a tree that's 10 feet high.
Well, it's anticipated that the trees, when they're planted, it will probably be 10 feet high and then grow from there.
What do you mean?
The trees we're planting are between, the deciduous trees are between 14 and 16 feet when they're planted. And the evergreens are 12 to 14 feet when they're planted.
And they're going to be a barrier to the noise and the light and the pollution?
I doubt there'll be any pollution, but the intended to
Well,
buffer.
isn't there exhaust from the cars?
Well, yes, there is.
How can you park 60 cars there and not have any exhaust?
They will have exhaust.
Well, I'm not an engineer, but I just think that. And also, I don't know about the traffic study. There really wasn't a traffic study done.
We're going to have the traffic engineer later so you can address.
But I didn't see any results in your literature there about a traffic study. It said it would be done after the fact. If the proposal is okayed, then they're going to do a traffic study? That's how I read that.
Mr. Ogrodnik, you're going to be your witness, right, Gary Dean?
Yes, and I would refer to the documents that are provided and are available. There's a May 6, 2020 traffic and design traffic impact statement from Gary Dean, who's our professional engineer that is going to address the traffic. He's next.
He's-
Well, I'm not a professional engineer, but I can count cars.
Okay, well,
And
Okay, so again, if you can hold that question for the professional that's going to talk about them.
today between 4:30 and 4:40, there were 72 cars go by my house. I
Okay,
can count them.
okay.
I caution you again that the board is not permitted to consider any testimony that is given under oath, not given under oath. If you have things you want to say that you want the board to believe as true, you must say that at the correct time, which is not now.
Oh,
And-
I'm sorry, then. I'm sorry.
And you must be sworn.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had to be sworn in.
I think the board understands, the board is familiar with this procedure and members of the public are not.
Yeah, well, I'm not.
He reminds me every meeting, so don't worry about it. Any
Okay.
questions, Mr. Witness?
Okay.
Okay, so I think we're ready. At this point, I don't see any more questions. So Jim, if you could close the public line, and I think Tina's she's been working for 2 hours now. So I'm going to suggest we have a 10-minute break.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to follow up on one brief thing with Mr. Stiers. It's really a legal issue that I believe, should have an answer to. Certainly, I can hold that till after the break, but if you prefer, I can ask.
Go ahead. Get out of the way.
Mr. Stiers, you made reference to the, or perhaps it was Mr. Ogrodnik made reference to the change in the township ordinance with respect to stormwater. And certainly, members of the public probably don't, that the state has required municipalities to adopt new standards. But my question is, I think, straightforward. Is the plan that is presented this evening, does this comply in all respects with the new ordinance, or does it comply with the old ordinance, or both?
At this point, it would be the old ordinance is what it's being governed by.
All right. I ask the question for this reason. This is not a question. This is a point Mr. Ogrodnik might want to consider, but in any event, I point that out because as I understand the DEP guidance, an application is judged by the old ordinance as long as it is, quote, complete, unquote, before the new ordinance becomes effective. It strikes me that this application, what is presented this evening, is quite different from what was presented before. And I think it raises the legal question about whether the application as currently presented was complete at the time the new ordinance was adopted or not. Not saying I have an answer to it, but I just don't want to blindside people later if that is raises a question. And Mr. Chairman, if I can ask your forbearance just a brief while longer. I have observed that there are a number of people who've asked questions who are not on video. I read to you a section of the mandated requirements, state mandated requirements for public meetings that, including this one, that are conducted remotely. One of the requirements says, all individuals giving sworn testimony at a remote public meeting shall appear by video in addition to audio. Again, I don't want people blindsided later, but those people who are not appearing by video, the state rules on remote meetings like this one will require you to be presented by video as well as audio if you are going to present your testimony. That is, if you're going to give testimony under oath.
Okay, so they can ask, so as I understand you, they can ask questions like they have been, but later on, if they want to present facts, as a witness, they have to be on the video. Is that right?
Correct. That is the way I understand the state requirements. Again, it just says all individuals giving sworn testimony. I would not interpret that as individuals asking questions.
Okay. So anybody that dialed in that wants to make a statement later on, you're going to need to come in on the Zoom.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, just real quickly, so I don't forget, during the break, I recommend that everyone mutes their microphones and their video feed. as the recording will still be up and running during the 10-minute break.
Looking at the screen, I see those last 5 public that talk is still up there. So you might want to get them off.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman?
For instance, Patty and David Warren and Lisa, they're still up, showing as panelists on my screen.
Okay.
I'm not sure why.
Patty, I have as just an attendee.
Yeah, but you got to put him back in the room.
I'm not sure if I have to click the leave, but I wasn't sure, so I just muted myself.
If you hit leave, you'll probably leave the entire meeting.
That's what I
Jim,
thought.
there's got to be a way for you to put him back into the waiting room.
Yeah, when we close
You
public,
can
that's what you do.
figure it out on the break if you want.
Okay, so who do I need to bring back in? I'm sorry.
Patty, David Warren, Lisa Elwood, and the phone number.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 9:10. Let's take a 10-minute break at 9:20. Everybody come back and mute yourself as you leave. See you in 10 minutes.
Yes.
Almost there. Jim, you on the line?
Okay, yeah, Mr. Chairman, so it's not allowed, so two options, I think. It's not allowing me, it's kind of not functioning, so I can promote to panelist temporarily or have Patty and Lisa jump off of Zoom and jump back in.
Okay. Okay, so you opened up, when you opened up for public, you did something, and you can't undo that?
It's just those two, but I'm not sure what, they have the microphone mute signal. But you know, what the two options that I have and have been using tonight is ask to unmute, and then if you go to more.
Okay,
but-
leave it like it is, then we'll start off. Okay, so
Okay.
everybody, here, Tina,
Yeah, I'm here.
take a roll call, please.
Okie dokie. Mr. Stamler,
Here.
Ms. Lilly,
Here.
Mr. Vouchek,
Here.
Mr. Walmacher,
Here.
Ms. Comfer,
Here.
Ms. Haynes,
Here,
Chairman Herbert,
Here.
Mr. Maskey,
Here.
Mr. Anderson,
Here.
Mr. Euro,
Here.
and Jim and I are here. Okay, so we're all here.
Okay.
Hey, Frank, this is Phil. I just have a follow-up question on what Mark read about the, when it comes to testimony, they will be on video.
Right.
They need to be on video. Do we have to let them or seek their approval to put them on video?
Well, I think
the
the
legal question.
yeah, I think the better answer is that it's simply not up to the board. They have to be prepared to present themselves by video under the state rules in order for the board to accept their testimony.
Okay, but do they know that?
Well, that's why I was giving that information before we get to that point in the meeting. Give people fair warning that I didn't make the rules, the state made the rules, but for a remote meeting, the indication is, the rule is that they must appear, I think the words are very clear, shall appear by video in addition to audio in order to give sworn testimony.
All right.
I suppose I could analogize that to some extent to a public meeting, and perhaps that's the reason for the state rule. If somebody appeared at a public meeting, you wouldn't expect them to come with a, you know, with their face hidden. So that's speculation to some extent.
That doesn't really have to have a mask on these days, Mark. So if you're gonna,
I do understand that things have changed. And as I say, that's speculation on my part to some extent, but in any event, I think the rule itself is clear. Shall appear by video in addition to audio.
Okay, that the rule is fine. I was just questioning is that, did everybody hear that? Since we put them on one by one, or doesn't it matter?
Well, I think that's a fair question. My information was intended, of course, for the board, but also as providing information in advance to members of the public. So I think it's a reasonable question whether members of the public heard that. I don't know how they'd be aware of this rule if other than my providing it to them.
Thanks,
and
Mark.
And God knows what happens if we have a technical problem. They can't start their videos.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The state has not provided an answer to that logical question.
We're breaking ground here. Okay, Mr. Ogrodnik, back to you.
So our next witness is Gary Dean. He's our professional engineer that specializes in traffic. He had submitted a memorandum dated May 6, 2020. And I asked that he be sworn in. He did not testify at the last hearing. And I'd ask that he be sworn in now.
Mr. Dean, can you raise your hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Just state and spell your name for the record, please.
Certainly. Gary Dean, D-E-A-N. Professional address is 181 West High Street in Somerville.
Mr. Dean, could you please give the benefit of your education and qualifications to be qualified as a professional engineer in the area of traffic?
Certainly. I'm a graduate of Lehigh University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering and a former member of the faculty of Lehigh. and Lafayette College, having served as an adjunct professor teaching transportation engineering. I've been licensed in New Jersey as a professional engineer since 1987. I've appeared regularly in this community before both this board as well as the planning board on dozens of occasions over the past 35 years or so.
So we could accept the qualifications. It seems everybody's from Lehigh to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gary, could you explain your study with respect to this house of worship application?
Sure. Because the applicant is seeking a form of use variance, we submitted a May 6th traffic study that focused on a comparison of the projected traffic associated with a house of worship, contrasted with what one might otherwise expect to be developed in the zone. And to prepare that, I reviewed your land use ordinance and reviewed the permitted uses in the R residential zone that include as outright permitted uses a public library, a cemetery, a community center, and a first aid fire rescue squad. Your zoning ordinance also permits as conditional uses, aside from a house of worship, both a nursing home and a daycare center, and obviously single family residential is a permitted use. I then evaluated the size of the property at just over 5 acres and the allowable impervious coverage limitation, and developed an estimate of building sizes that, again, for comparison, would fit within the confines of the subject property. And I'll focus on the 4th page of our report, which sets forth that comparison of the traffic contrasted with the proposed house of worship use. And the way traffic engineers prepare these estimates and the database from which the estimates were prepared are all appended to that traffic report, are published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And that is an international professional organization of traffic engineers and transportation planning consultants who, among other functions, much like myself, we go out for given land uses. We conduct traffic counts of actual sites, and then depending on the size of the use or number of dwelling units and whatnot, that information is submitted to ITE, as it's known. And about every 6 or 7 years, they compile a fairly extensive database of, I think it's 250 different land uses that contain data that statistically can be reduced to allow us to project future traffic for a given land use depending on its size. And in this comparative analysis, I evaluated a number of different uses and appropriate size and estimated the traffic during 4 critical time periods that are typically of interest to planning and zoning boards, as well as members of the public. And on a weekday, those periods are during morning and evening rush hours, commuter peak hours when most people are leaving their homes and driving to work, and vice versa in the evening. We also evaluated a weekend peak hour, and for a house of worship, one would expect that to be on a Sunday or a Saturday, depending on the sect. And then finally, we evaluated weekday total traffic. In other words, the traffic one would expect on a 24-hour basis. And the house of worship, as we might expect, generates very little traffic during traditional rush hours. As most boards are focused, as our traffic professionals, of evaluating elements such as roadway capacity and the ability of a driveway to function when the road system is most constrained. That's typically during the morning and afternoon weekday rush hours. A church, by contrast, generates very little traffic at that time. And if they happen to have administrative staff that was presenting, maybe there are certain early morning services that might attract a few parishioners, but by and large, it's minimal use. And for this particular church, based on its size and the number of attendees or seating capacity, the church would generate two trips in the morning peak hour. And I would submit that's basically what a house would do. In the afternoon, that volume is a little bit higher, about 7 total trips. And to put that in a contrast, that's about 1 car movement every 8 or so minutes. So it's imperceptible from a traffic engineering or capacity perspective. The busiest time for a house of worship, as we might expect, would be on a Sunday. And in that peak hour, it's coincident with the expectation that there would be a dismissal if the church happened to run 2 services, and they were certainly busier. If the church had a dismissal, for example, of a morning service, and then within that same 60-minute window, there would be then an arrival for the next, say, later morning service, we could have up to 95 traffic movements. And that's basically 45 in, 48 or 49 out. So that's essentially how that works. So the parking lot would empty at the conclusion of the first service, give or take, and then we would have arrivals. And I should point out that because these are based on estimates of ITE, this does assume a church at maturity, full occupancy, traditional enrollment. And I don't know, Mr. Grodnick, whether we've put these this information in the testimony, but my understanding is that the church is currently comprised of approximately 90 parishioners. And obviously the seating capacity has been designed to accommodate growth within the community as the church's outreach continues. So that's why the parking lot is sized accordingly, as is the sanctuary. And the expectation is when the church first opens, there may only be a single service, and there may only be 40 to 45 vehicles with roughly 2 people per vehicle. So it isn't until the church reaches its greater capacity that we might even approach the numbers I've used in my report. And then finally, on a weekday, a typical house of worship may have up to 64 trips, which is 32 people coming in and 32 people leaving for church business throughout the day. As we contrast this with some of the other uses as permitted in the zone, and in my opinion, that is the litmus test, and you'll hear from our planner, is this particular use out of contrast with what is expected in the zone? As you've heard from Mr. Ogrodnik, as well as I believe Mr. Anderson, the church is a permitted use in the zone. It is by virtue of this particular lot's size and the limited frontage, which I think is deficient by only 5 feet, that it doesn't meet your requirements for the conditional use standard, thereby elevating the need for the use variance or the D variance. But we do need to compare that permitted use as a conditional permitted use with other permitted uses in this zone. And a library, by way of example, would generate 10 times more traffic easily than a church would on a weekday. And certainly throughout the day, literally 1,000 more vehicles than would a church. A community center at 21,000 square feet would generate roughly 40 vehicles per hour and 600 on a daily basis. And I use these volumes only to say your ordinance sanctioned a certain number of non-residential uses in this zone, and a church is one of them. But as I compare all of these other uses, including things like a daycare center and a nursing home, I won't go through every number, they're in our study. They all generate significantly more traffic than the proposed house of worship. And in terms of how does this use fit within your zone plan, in my opinion, it is consistent. Your zone plan anticipated a house of worship in the zone. And it is certainly among the lowest of the other permitted and conditional uses, except for a single family home on the site. The next step in our study, and because of COVID, traffic engineers, typically we go out, we do some traffic counts, and we evaluate the functioning of the road and its capability to accommodate additional traffic. Because of the COVID pandemic conditions, certainly I think we'd all agree that traffic has been far from what we might consider normal or typical conditions. I had the fortune of having looked at a site that was originally proposed for development on Hillsborough Road that was subsequently abandoned, but I did have some data, I believe it was from either 2015 or 2016. And that data was collected during the evening peak hours and on Saturday. And I mention this only because I have no other way to do a traffic study, but what I did in my analysis is what traffic engineers typically do, which is to assume that traffic historically grows on an annual basis as development continues within a community, as demographics change. And so I applied a certain number of factors to increase the 2015 volumes to contemporary traffic volumes in 2020 when we did our study. COVID has changed that. What remains unknown is whether people will continue to commute, whether the work from home program will continue to be embraced by employers and employees, whether traffic will ever resume to those pre-COVID levels, at least in the near future. Irrespective of that, I'll say premise, we did assume that we would get back to normal. And we evaluated the traffic flow that would enter and exit the driveway during the evening peak hour, 5:30 to 6:30. And on Hillsborough Road, there are roughly just under 300 vehicles per hour. On Saturday, and I would model our Sunday service to be equivalent, if not substantially less traffic on a Sunday morning than we would see on a Saturday at noon. But again, just for worst case analysis purposes, we prepared these driveway evaluation studies just to ensure we would have safe and efficient traffic flow. And taking those factors into consideration, we concluded that the driveway would operate at a very favorable level of service B or better during those peak hours. And for board members and the public who aren't familiar with that term, traffic engineers use essentially a grading scale to consider the relative freedom of movement or congestion at a particular driveway or intersection. And it's a scale that ranges from A, being the best level of service, to F, being a condition that's symptomatic of long delays, high traffic volumes, potentially congestion, and the need often for mitigation or remedial measures. Where we have level of service B, I find, and again, that's a conservative estimate, I find that there's certainly no unusual or difficult design that would preclude this driveway from operating safely during their peak times on a Sunday morning, but certainly to the extent that they had activities later in a day. And with that, and again, you'll hear from our planner, certainly as an inherently beneficial use, I find that it is compatible with the neighborhood. The traffic can enter quite readily and exit. And it would be identical to the conditions found at adjacent intersecting streets along Hillsborough Road. I do want to offer some commentary on the parking stall size. I know the board did deliberate on that. I understand that the 10 by 20 has been the long-standing ordinance, I think, for at least 35 plus years that I've been engaged in the township. Most communities have recognized that the world does no longer drive LTDs and Mercury marquees and some rather sizable vehicles, although now we're into SUVs. I believe a board member inquired about a particular GMC vehicle that she drives, and the, I'll say, freedom of movement and convenience of having a wider parking stall size. I can't disagree with that. I mean, if we could build 12-foot wide stalls, that would be great. My concern is the balance between environmental and proper use of land and balancing the needs of over convenience, if you will. The standard in the industry standard for parking stall size, I'd say in Hillsborough is somewhat unique in adhering to the 10 by 20 is 9 by 18. For example, it is the uniform parking stall standard for the residential site improvement standards for housing communities. 10 by 20, I advocate in two circumstances. Places like Home Depot, where people often have large parcels, building materials, boxes, Costco, things of that nature, and supermarkets. Beyond that, particularly for a house of worship, where the parking is used once a day by parishioners, people who are familiar with the site, I would urge the board to consider the 9 by 18 stall. Going back to the GMC Acadia, that vehicle is 6 feet 3 inches wide, and leaving 3 feet roughly between adjacent vehicles in the parking stall, that is more than enough space for that door swing to clear without interfering with the other vehicle. I understand it does add some impervious coverage. I normally don't advocate for larger parking stall size. In my opinion, I consider that to be a little environmentally irresponsible, particularly where we're now focused on new stormwater regulations and finding ways to better treat stormwater runoff. And I think given the nature of the use and the fact that the parking lot is oversized for the foreseeable future, I don't see any benefit in providing that excessive amount of impervious coverage. By my estimate, a 9 by 18 parking stall size, not even estimate, it's calculation, is 162 square feet. A 10 by 20 is obviously 200 square feet. The 10 by 20 is 23% bigger, and it adds no measurable benefit. I think the board agreed that 18 feet depth is probably okay. But the 10-foot wide is, again, more luxurious and accommodating. I just don't think, given the nature of the use, that will have infrequent parking turnover, unlike one might find in a retail center, that the benefits of that don't outweigh what I consider to be the consequences. But as you've heard from Mr. Stiers, the applicant is willing to make that adjustment if you believe it's appropriate. I just think from a traffic engineering perspective, looking at where vehicle sizes have diminished over the years, and in fact, vehicles like a Toyota Camry are significantly smaller, Honda Accords, things of that nature. So, but for the SUV crowd, and I understand there's the occasional pickup, I have one, they are nicer, but I can park in a 9 by 18 stall. So, and that's in a Ford F-250. So it's not necessary, but I understand it does provide a little more of a generous design. Beyond that, Mr. Ogrodnik, I don't know if there was anything else for me to cover other than with the impervious coverage and the buffer concern. I know the police department has, I'll say, essentially mandated the secondary fire access. I think, again, the nature of the use needs to be evaluated in particular. I did a little research in a few houses of worship in the community, and I believe the Faith Lutheran Church on South Branch Road, St. Joseph's, which has an enormous parking lot on Colonial Road and Yorktown Road, they don't have secondary access. The Brookdale Assisted Living Facility on Otten Road only has a single way in and out. So your ordinance doesn't require it, and the consequence of providing it while having a minor improvement in emergency access to the event it's ever needed comes with the consequence of providing less buffer to the neighbor and requiring either more pavement or a structural design that lessens the ability to make this a more attractive site. So we'd certainly be willing to reconsider that in light of the fire department personnel, but from a traffic safety perspective, I don't find that second driver to be necessary, again, recognizing the context of which it's being requested for a house of worship, which by and large has limited traffic activity. Beyond that, I have no other comments to offer, Mr. Ogrodnik, unless there was something.
Could you just touch on garbage disposal, frequency, turning radius?
That refuse truck, as was described by Mr. Stiers, essentially pulls into the end of the parking lot. It would pick up, I would expect, on typical weekdays in the middle of the business day. That can be done by contract when there would be, I would imagine, virtually no one in the parking lot whatsoever, so that truck would have unlimited maneuvering ability if a dumpster is even required. I believe your ordinance does require a refuse enclosure, and the applicant has accommodated that in his design. But I would expect, and I would concur with Mr. Stiers, that the type of refuse is equivalent to a household, perhaps a little bit more, but not significantly. And so, candidly, it could be wheeled out in a 96-gallon container and left curbside for the truck to pick up just as easily. But I don't find that to be overly problematic. And obviously the other either permitted or conditional uses in the zone, such as a library or community center or nursing home or daycare, would all have refuse pickup as well. So it's nothing unique to the church.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, what question?
Frank, I have a question. Mr. Dean, I'm assuming you've been before the Hillsborough Planning Board at various times?
Many, many times.
Okay, and usually you've got two representatives from the Township Committee there. Have you said to them that you think that their 18 by 20 foot requirement for parking slots is unreasonable or unnecessary?
I have.
You have?
Sure.
Okay, well, I respect that. And I'm assuming that in a study of a church, it seems that many are older drivers that might need a little bit more width in their parking slots. And remember, we're planning, as the church is, for maximum build out, correct?
Yes.
Right now, it's going to have 50% use, or whatever the percentage might be. But hopefully for them, they will grow to the point where they are at maximum capacity. And you're still saying that the 9 foot width will be fine for every driver.
Part of my reason for advocating it, and again, it's balance. This isn't even something like a Wawa or a Quick Check. They typically oversize their stalls, not even when the ordinance doesn't require it, because they know they have a lot of turnover. And with many people pulling in and out, it does facilitate better traffic flow. For a church, it's a little different.
Wait a minute, back up. Why would that facilitate better traffic flow? You lost me there.
Sure, because there's so much in and out traffic, people can just pull out more quickly and pull in more quickly, and it doesn't congest, say, for example, in front of the convenience store near the gas pumps. A church has a little different entering and exiting pattern where most people pull in one at a time and they take the closest spot, and then the next person in takes the second closest spot, and so on and so forth. So there's the expectation, because it is a slow but steady arrival, and we don't have simultaneous ingress and egress like we would have at Quick Check. We have a very orderly, systematic pattern where people are arriving before the service and then leaving a bit more scattered at the end. I would concede that, but it's a very slow process, and it's not a retail store where we need to accommodate high volumes of traffic so that we don't congest the access aisles within the facility. So it's the nature of the use, but I just, listen, I personally love parking in a 10 by 20 space, but I find it unnecessary for day-to-day life. And again, we're not driving 59 Cadillacs anymore that are 20 feet long. I think the longest car on the road today is an 18-foot.
Yeah, but we're saying the 18 feet is fine. We're not contesting the 18 foot versus 20 feet. It's the width that at least concerns me personally. And I understand the balance between impervious and parking width, but there also has to be, depending on how busy this parking lot may become in the future, the safety aspect, the property damage, how many cars get slammed into the side of other cars and things of that sort. I don't know. And when church is over, a lot of people leave kind of at the same time.
Some do, some don't. I mean, I think the applicant has agreed to provide you with the wider parking stall sizes. I just personally don't advocate them, only because I think it's just a lot of unnecessary blacktop that creates a big heat sink Monday through Saturday for no reason. And it's a design to accommodate essentially 1 hour, not even, probably a good 20 minutes on a Sunday morning, and then another 20 minutes at the end. And beyond that, it's just a big blacktop area that could be better put to use with additional buffers and preserving more green space. So I'm unusual in that way as a traffic engineer, in that I understand the luxury afforded by the bigger stall size. I just think And most towns do, they balance those needs. I wouldn't advocate anything less than 9. I think as an accommodation, and I did make a note, the concern some people have is that not everyone's the best driver. And as an option, in many areas, we've used hairpin striping, which is a double line where the 2 inner lines, and they call it a hairpin because it looks like a bobby pin, the 2 inner lines are set at about 8 feet apart, sometimes 7.5. So what happens is as the driver pulls in, they can align themselves better in the center of the spot as opposed to moving a little too far to the left or to the right. I'll ask Mr. Yarrow to weigh in on that, but it's a very common design technique to better organize and make parking, I'll say, a bit more uniform. It's a double stripe. The stall itself is still 9 feet wide, but it's a double line on either side of that 9-foot measurement. So there's a space in between each parking space, and drivers tend to obey that a little bit better.
Is there an example of that in Hillsborough?
I'm sure I could find some.
You saw like a paper clip?
Yeah.
Paper clip,
Thank you.
perfect. That's a good one. We unfold
Thank
the
you.
paper clip.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you,
exactly
Frank.
what it looks like.
Yeah, Chicky, I guess you're one of the ones that raced the heck out of.
Well,
in
John, it depends,
It's candidly more expensive for the applicant in the long term, only because when they go to restripe, the striping contractor gets to charge twice as much for materials. But beyond that, it does provide a more efficient alignment of vehicles in the parking stall size. But I know the board has made a decision. I wanted to just offer my opinion on it. And again, if this were a parking lot that were used Monday through Friday on a more regular basis, or even in a retail setting, I would agree with you. But for this instance, it is.
I understand, but you know what? We haven't heard testimony as to the total church proposed program. So, at some point, are they proposing a childcare or school or something else that might be a Monday through Friday? And they are proposing quite a lengthy program, Saturdays from 2 to 9:30 p.m. and so on. So, I mean, it's not just Sunday morning for an hour that I believe is being proposed. We'll hear from Pastor Sue at some point. But, I don't think we can just say it's an hour on Sunday.
I would agree, but I would contrast it with those activities on a Saturday or even weekdays are typically a dozen or 2 dozen people, not 180. So I will concede that there's activity, and obviously the church wants to.
Well, a wedding might attract more than a few people.
And at that instance, we see more ridership per vehicle typically, right? We have 3 people per car. So those events do occur. I won't dismiss it. And again, I don't want to belabor the issue. If the board has rendered your opinion that you're willing to grant the relief for extra impervious for that benefit, I only wanted to share with you, 35 years of experience of looking at the most efficient use of land that is the least environmentally impactful where we have an option such as this.
Bob,
To
did you
make the
have
building smaller.
Bob, did you want to say something?
No, I agree with Mr. Dean's testimony. And in my experience over the years, I have designed parking lots with 9-foot wide stalls and 10-foot wide stalls. He is correct with the hairpin striping, that it does tend to help a driver align themselves better with accessing that parking stall, as they become a little nervous about driving or ending up on the white stripe. So that is a consideration. But again, I would leave the decision to the board. Mr. Dean is correct, there is not much use on the property during the week, and you will have that, the additional traffic on site during the services on the weekends. But I've designed parking lots both ways, and I would leave it up to the board. I support the board in their decision.
Any other questions? If not, I have 2 questions for Gary. First of all, is there a possibility of having a few oversized spots for the big vehicles? Is that?
The challenge with that type of parking arrangement is, I'll say the regular automobile driver decides he likes that spot better, and then it defeats the purpose. So the only time that ever, I'll say, really works is, and it has nothing to do with the church, but highway rest areas, where people are towing, or there are campers or even trucks, then oversized spaces that are 40 feet in length make some sense, but certainly not within a church application. It's impossible to regulate.
Okay, my second question. So let's say, all 60 spots are going to be used, and let's say, those 60 people or 60 cars going to arrive in what, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes? How fast are they going to come? What's going to be the impact on Hillsborough Road as that many cars are trying to get into the property?
Sure. As you've seen from Mr. Steyer's plan, there is widening that is proposed along Hillsborough Road. It is a frontage improvement that creates, I'll say, the semblance of an improved shoulder and deceleration area. My expectation, and again, having done a number of houses of worship, the time period at 8:30, 9 o'clock, 9:30 on a Sunday morning is because it's such a low traffic time of day that the impact on through traffic is fairly minimal. And, there are numerous houses of worship throughout the community that have the same access concerns and constraints. I expect traffic that is following anyone turning into a church is driving their car with prudent and reasonable behavior. And if someone decelerates to turn into, doesn't even have to be the church, it could be one of the intersecting residential streets, that it's incumbent upon that following driver to slow down, decelerate, and accommodate if someone's stopping in front of them or turning. And that's endemic to any driveway constructed on the site, whether it's for a church, a library, or any other use.
Because, at that point, the westbound Hillsborough Road is a single lane. If somebody makes a left-hand turn into it, they're going to block any traffic behind them. And the eastbound, at this point, is still going to be single lane until those other two properties are widened. So.
Correct. The best, I'll say, reason or benefit to approaching motorists is that the sight distance, the visibility along Hillsborough Road is essentially unlimited in both east and west directions. That road is just about as level and straight as I've seen, where literally one can see hundreds, if not 1,000 feet down the road for any approaching or turning traffic. So I would submit that anyone on Hillsborough Road who's not turning into the church certainly has plenty of visibility of that vehicle stopping, decelerating, putting on their signal, things of that nature to turn. So
Okay.
there are no blind corners or abrupt profile alignments in the road. It's a good location.
So bottom line is just saying, even that there are many people coming in, making left-hand turns, say, on the westerly bound direction, it's not going to be like the Briggstown Bridge on River Road that everybody's sitting there waiting for, to make that left-hand turn. Agreed. It's a 24-foot wide driveway, and again, the traffic flow, by and large, will be uniform. So it's inbound prior to the service, and that should flow freely with no constraint for any exiting traffic. Okay. Any other questions, Dave? I'm asking.
Not at this time, no.
Okay, Bob. Anybody else on it? If not, we'll turn it over to Mr. Mensch.
Mr. Chairman, apparently out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
Briefly, if I may. Mr. Dean, I certainly understood and actually appreciate your comments about parking sizes generally. I know you to be very thoughtful about this, and I think your comments are generally well taken. But I do have a legal issue, which is something that perhaps Mr. Ogrodnik and Mr. Mensch would want to explore further. But as I understood your comments, they really apply generally to what you think makes sense as a parking lot size. Am I correct?
You mean a parking stall size, Mr. Anderson? Yes.
Stall size, you're correct.
Correct. And my comments were tempered by considering the nature of the use. And that's why I shared some examples where I do believe that wider spaces have merit. And that's where a degree of convenience and safety come more into play. I wouldn't advocate a 9x18 space if I didn't think it was safe. And because it has become, I'll say, the accepted standard for residential parking, which I would say is somewhat analogous to a church where people leave at different times and arrive at different times. And there may be 1 or 2 turnovers of that parking space per day, as opposed to a commercial use, which benefits from wider spaces and processing traffic and parking more efficiently. So it's within the context of the use in general. And I just advocate it only because, in my opinion, I'm the rare traffic engineer. I like narrower roads. I like, and that gives drivers, it slows them down, and it causes people to not drive it like a 55-mile-an-hour road. And for many years, and I think Hillsborough as well as Montgomery, the uniform street standard was 30 feet. And I always said, trust me, you don't want 30-foot wide roads, because your first complaint will be from residents, and that's people are speeding down our road. And even though they're 25 miles an hour, when you build a road that looks like a highway, it's going to be driven like a highway. So narrower, in my opinion, to a point, and that applies to parking spaces, is better. It requires people to pay attention to what they're doing. So I offer it only within the context of what the nature of the use is. That's my only rationale.
All right, I understand. By the way, your comments bring to mind some driving experiences I've had in rural England, but you're probably not advocating roads quite as narrow as that. In any event, my point really is that the ordinance here does not provide any exception to the mandated 10 by 20 parking spaces for this use, correct?
Understood. Yes, it's a uniform standard throughout the township, except for residential parking, which is, I'll say, superseded by RSIS.
Yes, controlled by RSIS.
Correct.
You understand that the board is obliged to accept as the appropriate standard what is in the ordinance, unless it finds a particular exception that's attached to a particular property. So, I mean, that's not a question. It's simply a point. And again, Mr. Ogrodnik or Mr. Bench may want to follow up on that. I also would like to make a comment which is relevant to something you said. Again, this is not a question to you, but it follows something you said. I think really follows up a question from Ms. Haynes. If this is approved, I think that if, for example, a child care center or various other things were added, those would be considered normally accessory to the house of worship use. And in general, something like that would not be subject to further board approval.
I didn't hear a question, so I'm.
No, as I said, that is not a question. It's a comment really following up Ms. Haynes' question to you about
Certainly.
What happens if there's childcare.
Churches often have accessory uses that are subordinate to the primary house of worship, and it runs the gamut. I mean, oftentimes childcare is part of it. Oftentimes counseling of different forms factors into it, and usually there is a community center or building that is separate and apart from the sanctuary building. And many churches have either built them connected to their main church or separate. And that's very common, as is a rectory or parsonage. So all of those fall under the umbrella, in my opinion, and looking at it from a traffic engineer as a house of worship. I know zoning sometimes doesn't always agree with that, but I would say for a house of worship use, historically and customarily, those types of ancillary components have always been part of the church's ministry in supporting and assisting the community. So to the extent, I don't know that there are plans, for example, for a child care center.
My point is a legal point. You also raised the question of a separate building, and I do mention that this property is proposed to have a separate building. But in any event, at least my reading of the case law is that a child care center, as an example, would be considered a normal accessory use. And if the church chose to establish it, childcare or a school, religious school, that it would not be subject to further board approval. That's my understanding of case law. But again, I'm not saying that I have the last word on that. We have two competent lawyers who may have comments on that. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Mensch, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jean, I have some questions for you. I think the discussion over the size of the parking stalls is a little bit like the tail wagging the dog, because obviously we're advocating that or deny the application, in which case it doesn't matter whether the parking stalls are 20 or 10 by 20 or a lesser size. But I'm going to start there with my questions and go backwards. With regard to, would I be correct in saying that narrower parking spaces would require cars that are turning into those parking spaces to take a wider turn radius to get into those spaces?
Correct.
Okay. And in this case, I'm correct that the driveway itself is also proposed to be narrower than the standard set by the ordinance, correct?
I don't believe that's the case. I don't think Mr. Stiers testified to that, but I don't recall. I believe it's 24 feet.
Correct. And do you know, I believe that it was the ordinance requires 30 feet. I got to check my notes now and see if I'm correct about that.
I don't believe that's a standard for a driveway. I mean, again, that goes back to my excessive wasted pavement that provides no benefit and has a lot of negative consequences. So if relief is necessary, I'll be a staunch advocate for 24 feet. That's probably as wide, if not wider, than many of the roads in the township.
Yes, now the mayor of
Sorry, I thought it was a question. Sorry about that. So in this instance, we have narrower spaces with narrower roads, which would cause the cars turning in to have to possibly go into the oncoming lane to make a turn into the parking space, correct?
They would have to, irrespective of the stall size.
Okay, so even with the narrower driveway, they would be able to turn into the narrower space without having to go into, at any chance, turn into the oncoming lane.
No, they would have to. And same when they back out, they have to back out across the entire road width or the aisle width. I don't know a parking lot design that doesn't have that.
Correct. And so by having narrower spacing and for spaces and a narrower driveway, we exacerbate the amount of movement into the oncoming lane that the cars turning into or out of the parking spaces need to make, correct?
I don't understand the question.
Sure. So right now, under the proposed plan, they have the smaller parking spaces and they have a proposed driveway which is less than what is set by the standard ordinance.
I don't believe that's the case. I don't know that that's
let's stop there then, and let's track that down, because I believe that the testimony before was that was the case. But if I'm wrong, then let's get that corrected so we don't waste your time. Give me one moment.
Yes, the required aisle width is 30 feet.
Thank you, Mr. Maskey. So,
and they're requesting a 24.
Correct. So right now, a car pulling into the parking space would have to, as you testified before, turn into the oncoming lane to make the turn into the parking space, and would have to, when backing out, would have to back out into the opposite lane in order to back out of the parking spot and then drive, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And if the driveway was wider by 6 feet, then the car backing out of the parking space would have to go less far into the oncoming lane because it has 6 more feet, correct?
Presumably, yes. Not necessarily. I mean, I haven't speculated. I certainly wouldn't advocate 30 feet. I know, for example, in your.
Well, sir, Mr. D, I'm sorry. I don't think my question was asking you what you're advocating for. I'm asking you what the standard is that the township committee has set as the standard.
Correct.
And I believe since before you testified that you did mention it to them and they haven't changed it, I presume that they didn't ask you to opine on what the ordinance should be. So we're here talking about their ordinance. My question to you is, with a wider driveway, they have to turn less far into the oncoming lane. Your testimony is correct, that's true, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. So when you testified before about the visibility of Hillsborough Road, what studies did you do with regard to the sight line of cars coming in or out of Hillsborough onto Hillsborough Road?
I visited the site in question. I reviewed the environs. I reviewed the terrain of the area. There is existing vegetation directly at the edge of the road presently on the property that presumably would be cleared to provide proper sight lines, but we will meet the necessary standard for sight distance.
Okay, but you did not take any specific measurements of what the sight distance is now, correct?
I did not now, no.
Okay. Did you have specific discussions with anybody with regard to what improvements they were going to make over existing vegetation or site conditions that would improve or decrease sight line of sight?
I reviewed Mr. Steyer's plans, which proposes the widening as was discussed and proposes a sidewalk, which necessitates additional clearing, and then includes street trees along the site frontage, but nothing in terms of shrubbery or anything that would otherwise obscure sight lines.
Okay, and there was no measurements taken or calculations made, correct?
Not specifically, unless Mr. Steyer's did. And again, we can meet the site distance standards.
With regard to traffic along Hillsborough Road at peak hours, did you take any measurements? I believe you said you didn't take any measurements of the current traffic at Hillsborough Road at the site during
Correct.
Weekend or evening peak or morning peak hours, correct?
Correct.
You did provide some studies that indicate that there was I guess this is back from 2015.
Yes.
Which you did for, I guess, another project, but you had the counts, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Did you do any, I guess you don't have any counts from that time with regard to any other intersections?
No.
Okay. Did you review the Township of Hillsborough Environmental Commission report dated November 10th?
Yes.
Okay. Did you see in their report, they asked for and noted there was no level of service analysis done for intersection of Hillsborough Road and Willow Drive, Beverly Drive, Ardsley Road, South Woods Road, and Amsterdam Drive?
Correct.
Okay. And I take it you still have not done any counts with regard to those intersections?
No.
Have you done any analysis with regard to if you're a next door neighbor or a generally adjacent property to this site trying to pull in or out of their own residence during the time church lets out? Have you done any analysis as to what their level of service impact would be as they try to pull in or out of their driveway at the same time?
No.
I assume that would be the same if there was a wedding or a special event, what the impact would be of the next door neighbors trying to pull in or out of their own sites.
Correct.
Okay. With regard to the study that you've, the report that you have provided, you have provided data with regard to proposed or potential various uses, correct?
Correct.
And as far as you know, none of these uses have actually been proposed, correct?
I don't know the history of any other applications on this site.
Okay. You're not aware of any?
I'm not aware of that there haven't been any or there have been any.
Okay. When you calculated these numbers, then your trip generation comparison is comparing a hypothetical use at a hypothetical size at hypothetical times, correct?
No, they're actual times.
Okay, hypothetical use, because no one, as far as you know, you're not comparing an actually proposed library that was or is proposed to be put on the site.
No, I'm comparing with what is permitted in the zone.
I understand. What I'm asking you is you didn't look at a specific proposal for a library and compare the traffic generated off of that specific proposal to this one. You're comparing a generic proposed use of a library.
Correct.
Okay. And when you calculated the size of that proposed use, you did that how?
I did that by reviewing, I don't recall the calculations, but I reviewed the impervious coverage and I don't recall whether there was a floor area ratio, but I'm looking in our study. We must have looked at FAR, and I don't have all of my notes. I'm just reviewing the study. I developed a maximum building area of 48,000 square feet, which would be a 24,000 square foot footprint.
I see 48,000 square feet for the nursing home.
Correct.
Is that what you're referring to, sir?
Well, it's on page 2 of my report, second paragraph. It's looking at the developable tract area, 222,000 square feet, and a 15% MIC limitation.
Okay. So that 40,000 square foot, that's the FAR. So you kind of figured it was a 2-story building. So divided by 2, you get 24,000 square foot footprint.
Correct.
Okay. So now that number of 24,000 square feet is different than the size that is listed for the various uses in your trip generation comparison chart.
Correct.
Okay. Can you just explain to me what the 2 different numbers are?
As I recall, and this is now over a year old, the parking standards differ for each of these uses. And as we go to multi-story buildings, obviously the footprint contracts, and that allows more area that can be used for parking. So the only thing I can surmise is that if there were different parking standards, and I imagine there are for each of these uses, that necessitated a different calculation as to the developable building size.
So you're guessing that these numbers take into account the area for parking and then subtracted that out for the actual square footage of the building, allowing for the parking requirements of each of these uses?
Correct. With a 15% impervious coverage limitation, that's 33,000 square feet of paved surface or hard surface. And for example, if a daycare center, 20,000 is a little excessive. Heck, I could even make it 10, do a 2-story building with a 5,000 square foot footprint. I'd need 30 parking spaces. I know I would be under the limit. Same thing with a library, et cetera. So there are certain economies in scale that allow more parking to be provided as the building goes up vertically.
Okay, but you don't have those, the data used to compare that, so that to confirm exactly what factors you considered with regard to parking or any other building standard requirements that might fit any of those uses?
Not off the top of my head, but candidly, I mean, we could choose any one of these uses and say, all right, I was off by double. Each one of those uses still generates more traffic than the church.
Right. What's the traffic generation of the site now?
It's a single family home, so 10 trips per day and roughly 1 per peak hour.
Okay. So compared to what's there now, this would be a significant increase.
And I conceded that the continued use as a residential property, yes, would have low traffic. But the exercise is, does this use, recognizing that the variance that's been requested, is it out of character with what is otherwise anticipated in the zone plan? So that's the test that we bear, and certainly a house of worship with its limited traffic impact certainly is within that spectrum of anticipated and sanctioned uses within the zone.
Understood. So if you're the neighbors living nearby, basically it's the data would suggest, hey, be thankful for this. It could be much worse.
That's not the point of it. It's to give the board information to consider the relative negative criteria associated with the relief that's requested in terms of, is this use dramatically out of contrast with what is otherwise expected in the zone plan?
Now, when we talk about permitted uses in the zone, this is a conditionally permitted use, correct?
Yes.
Which means it's only permitted if it meets the various requirements set forth in the statute.
Correct.
Or the ordinance, this one does not. Correct?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was a question. Yes, that's correct. That's why we're before the Board of Adjustment.
In your report from May 6th, you indicate that if the variance application is favorably considered by the board, then as part of the site plan application, the projected traffic impacts will be more thoroughly studied, particularly related to any off-track traffic impacts. Why wouldn't that be a study that would be completed now, so that when the board is weighing the positive and negative criteria, and here, of course, more specifically the negative criteria, they would have that data as to the projected traffic impacts and any off-track traffic impacts?
Sure. As you're aware, that is, when a use is sanctioned in a zone plan, presumably the off-track traffic impacts have also been considered appropriate for the environs in the area. And in this particular instance, given the nature of the use, we're not proposing a shopping center or other use that would generate traffic coincident with rush hours. The fact that the traffic by and large is limited to either later evening hours on a weekday, to the extent the church has programs on a Saturday or Sunday, that is considered an off-peak condition. So while I could certainly study all of those locations at a weekday rush hour, I can assure this board and you that there would be zero traffic impact, measurable traffic impact associated with this proposal, which is why the table in our report includes the projection during morning and evening rush hours. And I'll defer to Mr. Euro or Mr. Maskey. I don't need to do a traffic study for 7 trips in a peak hour. I already know the answer. It is immeasurable. There is no impact. So I could do it. I'd love to earn a fee to do it, but it adds no value to the consideration of the merits of this application.
When you determined that there was 7 trips in an evening peak hour, what data did you use?
I used the data that's appended to the report, and it shows the trip generation. I'm going to look for it. It is land use code. Oh, I also included the levels of service. I think somebody had a question about that. I see that information was appended to the report. I used the ITE data for a house of worship.
And that data is for a generic house of worship, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So what does 7 trips?
Excuse me, it's John Stamler. Frank, it's going on 25 after 10. If we're going to continue with this witness, I suggest we just stop now.
Normally we don't take new witnesses testimony after 10 p.m., right? And, if we can finish up in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'd like to continue so we have continuity.
I don't know how long we're going to go on with this witness. So
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, board members, I think I'm almost done. Of course, I don't know. I'm sure the public has questions, and I don't know, what they do with Mr. Dean, but I'm almost finished with my questions.
Right. So I think we could finish up this witness if we would allow ourselves 10 or 15 minutes more.
We could finish up and we'll let the public comment when we come back, right?
No, I want to go to, we don't even know how many want to comment.
Well, you better ask the other board members.
I will when we get there. Can we let Mr. Mensch finish?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, you want me to proceed?
Yeah, please proceed. Yeah.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Dean, I think you just answered my last question, which is the ITE, if I'm saying that right, trip generation was not specific to this site or this church, correct?
The IT data is for a house of worship. The other two, I'll say religious land use categories available from ITE are a synagogue and a mosque. And we're neither of those. So a house of worship is the appropriate land use category.
But so then my last question for you is the data that you've provided in this chart is based off of, not based off of specific understanding of how often they're going to meet on an evening or what the size of those meetings might look like now or in the future. That's based off of the chart that you just talked about.
Understand, sure. The ITE is intrinsically focused on impacts during rush hours, the time when the road is busiest, and then also when the use itself is busiest. So the data collected by ITE includes findings for weekday morning peak hour of the street between 7 and 9, and evening peak hour between 4 and 6 roughly. And then they include data for a Saturday peak hour and a Sunday peak hour. And that is the data. I didn't use Saturday, but that is the data that I presented in my report for a house of worship or a church. And it is based on studies of other houses of worship. So it is a database from which, depending on the size of the facility, so that the projections are based on the seating capacity, because seating capacity has a direct correlation on the ability to generate traffic. What generates traffic? The worshipers. So if we know how many are attending at full capacity, we have a projection of traffic.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Frank, I have a question of Mr. Dean. Mr. Dean, a while ago, you made the statement that Hillsborough Road had, terrific sight lines for its whole distance, at least east of Willow. My experience, and I don't know if Mr. Dean, my question is to you is, have you ever been there on a Sunday morning between 9 and 11, going eastbound, walking or jogging or on a bike, again, going eastbound, when you hit this section, which includes this particular lot in the middle, where there is no shoulder on either side, and there is a slight incline, and you cannot see traffic coming westbound. And if you happen to have cars coming up behind you eastbound, there is no shoulder to get safely over, whether you're walking your dog or jogging or on a bike. That particular narrowing of Hillsborough Road in that slight incline, you cannot see oncoming traffic for a short distance, a distance of those 3 lots. Have you been there during that time period, not in a car?
I have stood on the subject property and obviously walked the site frontage. If I could be allowed to share screen for a moment, I believe a picture is worth 1,000 words. And what I'd like to show the board is the perspective of Hillsborough Road from the subject site driveway, which reinforces my opinion. There is a shoulder on the westbound side of the road. It is about it. I'd show you the picture to show you exactly what I'm describing. There is none on the eastbound side. I would agree. That condition is endemic to the development of this property, whether it's for another house. Thank you. Whether it's for, thank you, Craig. Perfect. So this is the perspective of Hillsborough Road looking due east. Thank you, Craig. We're not quite at the site driveway, but we're very close. You'll see a full shoulder on the westbound side, no shoulder on the eastbound side. There we are. Perfect. The twin mailboxes is our site. There's a 1-foot shoulder on the eastbound side, but as you've heard, the applicant is going to provide a shoulder across their frontage. And the pattern of development and improvements along Hillsborough Road, candidly, has been piecemeal. But as we go down to Beverly, you'll see a shoulder has been constructed when that subdivision was put in.
But Mr. Dean, that's not what I'm saying. You've got, what I am saying is if you are back up a little bit to the west, those 3 lots, of which yours is in the middle.
Correct.
There is a slight incline, which these pictures will not show. But I am telling you that you cannot see westbound traffic coming for a distance short, if you're in a car, it's like 5 seconds. But if you're walking a dog or if you're on a bike, that incline blocks your vision. You don't know what's coming. And if you have a car coming up behind you, you kind of hold your breath and hope there aren't two vehicles crossing at the same time, because you have no shoulder, and you can widen your property as you are proposing, but you still have the properties on either side of this property that are still going to create that line of vision issue. But I just wanted to point that out, that it's not really clear sailing the way this picture looks like it is, but it doesn't show that incline, and it doesn't show that where you cannot see the westbound traffic coming at the same time if you have eastbound coming up behind you. So and the other issue that has come up,
if I could just
it's not
respond to
in the
that.
application. Wait a minute, if you haven't, it's not in the application, but it could evolve into this, is a daycare center or a church school, which would involve traffic during certainly morning rush hour.
I'll let Mr. Ogrodnik reply to that, but that is not a proposal for this
I
site.
know it isn't now, but it is part of a church activity.
We talked about that already, Chicky.
Okay.
Frank, I have one question for Mr. Dean. Mr. Dean, regardless of the width of a parking space, whether it's 9 or 10 feet, does the length of the parking space, whether it be 18 or 20 feet, is the turning radius shortened by an 18-foot length parking space opposed to a 20?
There's 2 fewer feet in the aisle. In other words,
Right.
I don't care where the stripe ends. If a car is only 15 feet long or 16 feet long, they still have the full half aisle width and then the additional space they don't need. So,
Okay.
At least the one row of parking.
I thought it was a simple
both
question.
rows of parking that face west and the rows that face the building allow for vehicle overhang on the sidewalk. So the effective stall length at that point is 20 feet where overhang is permitted or can be accommodated, let's say.
Yeah, Gary, so that my point was this. With a parking space that's 20 foot in length, I could park in there and leave a few feet in front of my vehicle because I'm utilizing the full length of the parking space, which will make it more difficult for somebody to pull in. If it's an 18-footer, I'm forced to bring the vehicle closer to the front, which in turn would make it easier to pull into a parking space, if you ask me.
If it's longer?
If the parking space, forget it. I don't have a question.
Okay, let's open this up. We're almost at the end here, so let's open it up to anybody from the public. I see one hand up, Angela. So Jim, could you let Angela in for a question?
Sure. That's okay. Actually, I'm gonna have to promote Angela as a panelist. I'm not sure where the disconnect is, but we'll do that temporarily.
Go ahead. Okay, Angela Tang, you're on. Angela? Angela Tang?
Angela, you have to unmute yourself if you would like to speak.
Okay.
I don't have a
Wait.
question. I don't have a question.
Well, this is only for questions for this witness at this point. If you have a statement, that's later on. Okay, so you have a question for this traffic witness?
She said she doesn't have a question,
Okay,
but her hand was raised. Maybe it was an accident.
okay. Let's try to end up. So at this point, Mr. Ogrodnik, you have a few more witnesses to go, right?
Yeah, we have our planner and Pastor Sue.
Okay, so,
What about the architect, Mike?
Yep. If the board wants to hear from the architect, we'll introduce the architect before Pastor Sue.
okay, so let's get it on the next meeting, which is, how does April 7th, as I understand, David, there's nothing on there now, so,
Correct, it's open.
okay. It's a scheduled meeting. Let's do it.
Yes, regular meeting.
Do the members of the board agree with that?
Well, I know, hey,
Good.
David, with
Yeah.
the McDonald's application, they might not be ready, so and again, we need the board members' approval, but are we better off maybe canceling that first meeting and just making the third week where we could do this application in McDonald's? Would that be better for you guys, David?
Right now, April, one meeting in April, April 7th. We can obviously shift harvesters to that day. I don't know how much more, it sounds like.
You know what, John, you know what? I think this is going to take another whole meeting by the time we wrap up 3 more witnesses and,
Right, okay,
so let's go with the 7th.
okay, sounds good.
With or without notice, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Anderson?
I'm mute.
It is up to the board to decide. I have not yet heard a request, but if Mr. Ogrodnik wants to make a request to do it without further notice, it would be up to the board.
I would make that request. After our December 2nd hearing, we did renotice, although not required, just because I wanted to button up some loose ends with respect to the anticipated impervious.
Okay, and Mark, he would not have to renotice just to adjust the impervious?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, good.
First of all, he has renoticed to adjust it to what was requested this evening as opposed to before. But if there's a further request, it appears to me to fall within that narrow exception because it's something that it's come from dialogue with the board.
Right, okay, so no renotice for the 7th.
I do not see a legal requirement, but always up to the board to decide whether the public ought to be provided with additional notice.
I don't think we need one either.
No, I don't either.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion to move the meeting to the, what is that, the first Wednesday of April?
April 7th.
April 7th.
April
Is there a
7th
second?
without renotice.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. See everybody on the 7th.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just I know there are a number of members of the public present, people who may not be familiar with the process. What has just happened is, I think the easily understandable part is that the meeting will be continued to April 7th. The question about notice, the board has indicated, I've indicated to the board that there's no legal requirement that you get additional notice. The board has determined that it is not necessary. You will not get further notice. There will not be a further notice in the mail. There will not be further notice published in the newspaper. This is your notice that this will continue on April 7th of this year.
Thank you, Mark. Everybody have a good evening.
You want motion to adjourn?
Oh, I thought, okay.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Anybody opposed? Good evening.
Good night, everybody. Happy St.
Good night. Good night.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye, Dina.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye, Tina.
Bye.
I like the personality that showed up again.
Where, near the end? I was starting to get a little. I got to work early in the morning, so.
And I had my second COVID shot today, so my personality wasn't as bubbly as it usually is.
Thank God.
Which